zone. Prehistoric. Giant.
Very large, and they're certainly more than big enough to represent a danger to us.
And the secret to even larger size may lurk in their ancient DNA. Code for a truly monstrous Croczilla.
The propensity to become a giant is always present in the crocodilian lineages.
I think the conditions are ready right now for a super croc.
$65 million years ago, a devastating extinction event wiped out most of the Earth's reptile giants. Today, one massive-bodied beast remains.
They avoided the extinction that nipped the dinosaurs in the bud, leaving only birds as descendants. It's really an incredible success story.
They're one of evolution's most incredible survivors, revered by some as gods, reviled by others as man-eaters.
So never underestimate a crocodile in the water. If you get too close to it, then really, that's the end of it.
Meet the world's largest reptile, the crocodile.
They might not be quite as long as some of the giant snakes, but they're actually a lot heavier than those giant snakes, so they are actually the biggest reptiles on Earth.
These prehistoric giants can grow to enormous sizes, yet fossil evidence reveals their ancient relatives grew even larger.
If you go back 100 million years, there were crocodiles that were almost twice the size, and probably about 4 to 5 times the weight of the biggest crocodiles today.
In the late 1990s, paleontologists working in the Sahara Desert unearthed the bones of the largest crocodile ever known to roam the Earth, Super Croc.
Super croc is the nickname. Sarcosuchus imperator, the imperial flesh croc. That is the technical name.
Super Croc was probably 40 feet long. It would have been an absolute monster.
Scientists think Super Croc, like today's crocs, was a powerful predator stalking unsuspecting prey at the water's edge.
And Sarcosuchus was doing the same sort of things as these modern crocodiles are doing, except it was doing it 100 million years ago.
Millions of years later, a modern croc still hunts like Super Croc and haunts similar habitat. Yet can it grow to its ancient ancestors' gargantuan size? How big can it get? Here in Darwin, in Australia's Northern Territory, one potential Croczilla candidate dominates the region's tidal rivers and estuaries. Known locally as salties, these are the largest of the world's 23 species of crocodilians, saltwater crocodiles. The largest saltwater crocodile ever measured stretched over 6 meters long. Yet to outlast dinosaurs, you need more than monster size. You need a heavy-duty arsenal of survival traits. Salties have thick, armor-plated skin, muscular limbs, strong jaws lined with over 60 bone-crushing teeth, and powerful tails extending almost half their body length. It's one possible clue to their future size potential, honed to perfection by evolution. Crocodiles' bodies are designed to survive.
I mean, they can lose a limb, it doesn't matter. The dominant males are often missing a limb. You have an animal that's a survivor, and there's almost nothing that can get in its way.
It's almost like a Ferrari now. It's had so much refinement done to the general body plan of a crocodile that what you've got now is you've got, like, you know, the best possible crocodile that you could possibly have.
Salty is your A1 predator, something to watch out for. They eat humans every year.
Very large, and they're certainly more than big enough to represent a danger to us.
News accounts report lethal attacks. In rural Darwin in 2009, while swimming with her sister and 2 friends near a swamp called the Black Jungle. An 11-year-old girl vanishes. Police mount a ground search for the girl. Helicopters scan the bush from the air. The next day, they find her remains. Bite marks indicate her killer was a crocodile, measuring about 3.5 meters. Trained crocodile catcher Robbie Risk was part of the search team.
That was a really emotional event. And that took about a day to find any remains. When we did, you know, it was something that, you know, you don't really want in your head.
Groups of armed officers scour the area, setting traps throughout the floodplain, but they never find the culprit croc. Though attacks like this are rare, salties probably kill about 6 people a year. Yet officials estimate there are up to 150,000 of them moving from rural tidal rivers into Darwin waters.
The unique thing about Darwin is that it's essentially a city that's situated right in the middle of crocodile habitat.
And as they spread to urban and suburban areas, the odds of attacks on humans may be increasing exponentially.
If most crocodiles in the tidal rivers here didn't move, they'd get killed by other crocodiles. There's just not enough food and there's not enough space to go around. And this is why you've got saltwater crocodiles moving along the coast towards Darwin. And more crocodiles every year are found in and around Darwin. And obviously the potential for disaster is so much higher.
Accidental run-ins with wild crocodiles are an ever-present danger here. But there's an even more dangerous phenomenon. Rogue crocs that attack people on purpose.
Rogue crocodiles don't behave like normal crocodiles, and they represent a really very significant danger. Often rogue crocodiles are the kinds of animals which have successfully attacked someone. They realize how easy it is, and then they try and do the same thing again. And very much unlike other crocodiles, which tend to stay away from people, rogue crocodiles will try and seek people out.
Rogue crocodile is a problem crocodile. It's just got attitude and does, you know, wants to kill everything, really.
To reduce the risk of an attack by a rogue or other saltwater crocodile, Darwin authorities operate an ongoing catch and remove management program.
We've caught over 170 crocs this year, compared to last year, which was about 140. So we have actually caught a fair bit this year. Might even break the record. What we're doing here is just checking and rebaiting the trap.
Croc catchers like Robbie monitor over 60 movable traps. They keep them baited, and when they find crocs inside, they remove them, mark them, and record their size. The largest salty Robbie's ever caught measured over 4.5 meters. But any size croc can do some damage.
3 meters, 4 meters can actually crush skulls and stuff like that.
When you work with crocodiles, you have to be very respectful of what they're capable of. And if it goes wrong, that's when you lose your hand, that's when you lose your arm, that's where potentially you could lose your life.
Today, crocodile specialist Dr. Adam Britton is riding along with Robbie. He's collecting DNA to help create a genetic map of Darwin's crocodiles.
What we're doing is we're taking tissue samples from crocodiles that we're catching in Darwin Harbour, and we're comparing them with tissue samples from crocodiles that we're going to be collecting across the northern coast of Australia. And what that's going to do, hopefully, is tell us a little bit about where the crocodiles that are moving into Darwin Harbour are actually coming from.
Dr. Britton's map may someday pinpoint a breeding colony of giants. But for now, his research is geared toward keeping the peace between humans and a potentially deadly crocodile species.
What we can learn about these crocodiles is why they're moving and what's motivating them to move. And if there's a risk of crocodile attack, then you have to try and reduce that risk. And hopefully, we can figure out how to make it safer for people. And then people will be more likely to put up with crocodiles that live on their doorstep.
Well, here we are at number 2 trap in Darwin Harbour. Just going to give it a pull. As you can see, I've just tested the trap. The croc comes in. As he comes into the trap itself, he'll actually pull down on the meat, the bait, which triggers the door as old. So it's a pretty simple mechanism and it works pretty efficiently. All right, off to the next trap.
As the team heads off to check the next trap, they can only guess what size beast will take the bait. A crocodile can grow as long as it lives. It's another clue to their future size potential. When most creatures mature, they reach a maximum size and growth stops. But crocodile size has no limits. It's a phenomenon known as indeterminate growth. In captivity, with a steady food supply and fewer survival challenges, crocodiles may be able to live longer and grow larger than crocs in the wild.
These animals pretty much grow until the day that they die, so it is possible that these animals are going to reach much greater sizes in captivity than they normally would in the wild.
One of the largest captive crocs ever recorded, a saltwater crocodile named Gomek, lived here at the St. Augustine Alligator Farm Zoological Park in Florida. Gomek maxed out at over 17 feet, weighing nearly a ton. He became a main attraction, drawing audiences to his feeding shows in droves. Today, his supersized legacy lives on in another huge salty named Maximo.
So he's over 15 feet long, 1,200 pounds. He's an incredibly powerful animal.
Working with carnivores as large as Maximo carries extreme risks. Zoo staff is always cautious.
I said he looks at us as a potential food source, so we certainly need to watch out for that. He's surprisingly quick for an animal his size. You can see the power in this animal when he jumps up after a rat. It's just something you really don't want to get too close to.
Maximo's size may be what draws onlookers to his enclosure. Yet like other crocodilians, his most remarkable trait may be intelligence.
Crocs are definitely the smartest of all the reptiles. They have the most well-developed cerebral cortex of any reptile, and they're a lot smarter than people think they are.
Crocodilians have a reptile-sized brain. I mean, it's literally the size of a walnut. And yet, they are incredibly smart animals for what they need to do. And some of what they do is pretty spectacular.
In the wild, crocs seem to have an eye for detail. They can read their surroundings and respond by changing their behavior.
You can go into an environment, be observed by crocodiles that you never see, and you will never see them again. They didn't see you. They didn't like the way your clothes were. They didn't like the way you moved. They didn't like your boat. They hadn't seen your boat on the river. They noticed something was up. You will never find them again.
They may also display some form of memory.
To be a crocodile, you want to know where the best place to hunt is going to be on a day-to-day basis. And you can't just stumble upon it every day. You have to remember, you have to learn.
And here in captivity, some crocodilians, like this alligator named Bomber, seem to show thinking.
You tap him on the snout, he'll open up, throw a nugget of food in there, and he'll slam shut on. He gets a meal and somehow realizes that you want him to do that. The first time he'll do the trick just fine. The next time he'll move back about 2 inches. The next time about 4 inches. So he'll keep moving back. And what he's doing is, it seems to be that he's trying to lure you into the water to the point where you'll fall in. And God knows what he wants to do with you from there. This animal is thinking. I mean, this is a learned behavior.
These ancient survivors are more than creatures of pure instinct, and Maximo's no exception.
He's learned a routine for the show, and he knows time of day, so if we walk up onto that platform right at 3 o'clock, he starts going through his routine that he has to go through for the feeding show. So that didn't take him very long to learn it all.
Maximo!
He was trained to kind of a 3-tap cue, so if you kind of pound the boardwalk 3 times, he'll still react to that. A lot more intelligent than most people probably give him credit for.
Smart, powerful, huge, and still growing. Maximo's just 40 years old. At 4.5 meters, 544 kilos, he can grow for decades. Only time will tell how much bigger he can get.
It looks like we've got a croc in this trap. Yeah, be about 2.5 meters.
Back in Darwin, the team finds a salty in one of the harbor traps. Robbie estimates it's about 2.5 meters.
First, what we're going to do is chuck a snout rope over a top jaw, and then we're going to disable his jaws with a zip tie, and then we'll bring him out of the top of the cage.
They have to get it onto the boat, but first, they have to secure its jaws. To get the croc to open its mouth, the croc catcher taps it on the snout. He slips a snout rope around its upper jaw. But the noose is caught on the croc's upper teeth.
Just got to bring it back a bit more.
You don't want it flipping off at the last minute.
Nah.
Finally, the noose slips over the teeth and into position around the upper jaw.
Now I'll jump on the trap and I'll disable the jaws with a zip tie, so we don't get close enough to the croc ourselves. So there's no interactions between us and the animal itself, so no one's going to get hurt. Now what we're going to do now is just duct tape his jaws together and then cover his eyes.
Covering its eyes helps minimize stress.
Eyes covered, jaws are secured. Now we're ready to bring him out of the trap. And just securing his back legs, where they get most of their power from. And final part, just a bit of protection there from his other teeth that are protruding over the top jaw. So when we do handle him, we won't cut our hands up and stuff.
Even with the croc's jaws zip-tied and taped, with one swing of its head, its large teeth can tear open human flesh. With a wild salty captured for relocation, Robbie and the team loaded onto the boat.
Stop. Beautiful.
When the croc's secure, the team ties new bait, resets the trap, and heads off to check the next one. Here in Queensland, Australia, in the rivers and swamps surrounding Cooktown, some fear croc populations and attacks may be on the rise. In 2005, a crocodile measuring nearly 4 meters dragged a fisherman from his canoe and killed him. Park rangers located the croc and shot it. More recently, in 2008, on the banks of the Endeavour River, when a 62-year-old man left his campsite to check his crab pots and failed to return, his wife called authorities. Once on scene, they find crocodile slide marks down the riverbank. A full-scale search turns up one of the man's sandals and watch. Weeks later, authorities discover the man's remains inside a 4.2-meter croc. Experts say attacks like these are just freak accidents, but some locals worry. If crocs continue to spread to areas inhabited by humans, more fatal encounters may be inevitable. In Florida, at the St. Augustine Alligator Farm, biologist Dr. Gregory Erickson is studying a crocodile's main predatory tool, its bite.
We're trying to understand what makes these animals tick. We're interested in how the musculature and the mechanics of the jaws allow them to generate their bite forces, and how the shapes and sizes of the teeth contribute to the pressures that these animals use to make a living. These are our bite force transducers. When it bites down on this, it's going to exert a force, and this is a force sensor device, like a good bathroom scale, and it's going to send out a signal to a charge amplifier that's going to record the bite force.
He starts by prepping a specially designed bite force meter.
The meter's leather pad, so it doesn't hurt their teeth. And as soon as you touch one of their teeth, it triggers a snapping bite, is what we call it, and they'll slam down, apparently with as much force as they can possibly generate, and we'll get a recording instantly of what the maximal bite force was. I'm not exactly sure what this Nile crocodile is going to do. They tend to be rather surly animals.
Together with curator Kevin Torregrossa and another park staffer, Dr. Erickson enters the croc enclosure.
She's a mad motor scooter.
The crocodile fights, rolling and wrapping itself in the rope.
Leave him right there.
But finally, the team lifts the croc out of the water and onto an examination board.
What we're going to do is throw the board in. I'm going to push the jaws down on the board. You're going to put the mouthful on to hold his jaws on the board, and we're going to tape it up.
I hate that part.
A wooden block props open the animal's jaws and prevents it from clamping down.
Right there would be good.
Okay, cinch it down, tight.
What I'm doing is I'm taking dental putty. It's essentially the same material your dentist uses to cast your teeth when you're going in for dental work. And I'm going to use this to make some copies of the more prominent teeth in this animal. Don't do this at home. Don't do this with your pet crocodile. Or your dog, for that matter.
Before taking bite force readings, Dr. Erickson takes dental impressions.
By making molds of the teeth, then we can make casts of them, and essentially we can walk away with a replica of the teeth. From that, we can do studies as to how much pressure they actually generate at the tips of their teeth. But we really don't understand how the teeth work, and so that's what we're trying to do in this research. I hate doing this. It's not a natural thing to do, to put your hand in the mouth of a crocodile. It's for the cause, I guess. This will sit in about 5 minutes, so we'll be able to pop that right off and hopefully get this animal back in the water as soon as possible.
Another clue to crocodile's future size potential: predatory skill.
Crocodiles are classic ambush predators. In other words, they stalk silently and attack rapidly. They can hide in a river with just a nostril and an eyeball sticking above the water and prey on something that has no idea what's about to happen.
Crocodiles are masters of their habitat. To hunt, they often just sit and wait.
All animals have to have water, and so you've got a constant source of food coming to you, and all you have to do is get good at catching it.
It doesn't really matter who the players are coming to the water's edge. The crocodile doesn't care as long as it's a meal.
Hidden with its eyes, ears, and nostrils sticking just above the water's surface, a crocodile can use its powerful senses to home in on prey.
They have these pressure receptors around their jaw, and literally, they can detect changes in pressure through the water. They have an excellent sense of smell. They can smell animals and prey from quite a long distance away, and it could be several kilometers away. Their hearing's actually better than ours at low frequencies, and so they can hear the rustle of footsteps. They can hear animals moving through grass. Their eyesight is excellent too. They've got full color vision, and they can see at night very effectively.
Once locked onto a target, a croc approaches unseen, propelled by its powerful tail.
It's the driving force that allows them to be able to swim at great speeds, but more importantly, to slowly swim without creating a lot of turbulence.
And if they see something come close to the water, they'll swim underwater for a distance, and then they'll come up a little bit closer, and they'll have another look, and they'll see what the situation is. And they'll keep getting closer and closer, and all that prey item has to do is get sufficiently close to the crocodile, and as soon as that happens, bang, that's it, it's all over.
Launching an explosive surprise attack, a crocodile bites down with bone-crushing force, dragging its victim into the water to drown it. Sometimes it goes into a death roll.
The crocodile may roll to try to disorient the prey item. Sometimes the animal's dismembered at that point. Maybe the animal will die nearby from bleeding. Ideally, the crocodile's trying to drown the prey item. Once the animal's drowned, of course, then it's secure to meal.
Once its prey is dead, a crocodile uses its body to tear it to pieces.
They just simply rip it apart with a motion of their head. They're like a tube of muscle, a little bit of flexibility, especially in the neck region, the armor. There's a little break in the armor there, so it can just yank its head back and forth and just literally rip limbs and bodies apart.
Gravity helps it swallow.
Okay, let's see if this is seems to be.
Back in Florida, Dr. Erickson removes the dental putty from a nearly 2.5-meter crocodile's tooth.
This animal's really powerful. You saw right there, just touching that tooth set this animal off. They're a lot faster than we are, so you have to be careful. I mean, if we hadn't had that mouth taped shut, I'd be heading for the hospital right now. You never want to reach down into this area. We call it the hitting zone. Got a really nice mold here of the malariform teeth as well. And so we'll take these back to the lab and we'll make some replicas of this crocodile's teeth.
Now tighten it up.
With molds removed, Dr. Erickson prepares to measure the croc's bite force.
Here we go. Oh, missed it. Just missed it. Okay, so what happened? Here's the croc saw the bar coming.
They try again, hoping for a more direct hit.
All right. 375. Yeah, this animal's starting to tire a little bit, and so that's probably all we're going to get.
Roughly 400 pounds of force. With full energy, it's potentially capable of even greater forces. And as it grows, so will its bite.
Got it. Run all the way back. Good job. Back to his corner.
As the team releases the croc, it races off. Dr. Erickson will take his molds, bite force readings, and measurements back to the lab for analysis.
With the bigger crocodiles, such as the saltwater crocodiles, we're getting numbers approaching 4,000 pounds. Almost twice what we see in the spotted hyena, which is the bone-crushing champion among mammals. It's also twice as high as what you see in the Bengal tiger or an African lion.
Over 1,800 kilos of force eclipses any animal on the planet. Dr. Erickson believes the huge force is necessary for its survival.
Most crocodiles don't have particularly sharp teeth. They're blunt instruments, not well designed for puncturing things. But with the kind of forces these animals generate, they are able to produce pressures that are high enough to puncture through hide and sustain impacts with bones. And they pull it off, and they've been doing it for a long time, and they're pretty good at it.
Back in Darwin, after finding a second croc in a harbor trap, Robbie and his partner transfer their catches to a truck.
Measure them up. And then identification numbered. We always keep the heads up just to stop them from, regurgitating. And then they could drown because, their jaws have been taped up. This is a receipt book here. This is what goes to the croc farm, and we keep the other half. Record the sex and how we actually caught them, and also the size of the animal. The feature for these two crocs here are decided by the croc farm who we give them to. Being one a female, a fairly large one, they'll use for a breeder, where the other one is a male, they'll probably use for a skin product and or meat product. Yeah, two less out of the harbour for us to worry about, which is good. I'm glad we got them, and there's plenty more to catch.
Another clue to crocodiles' future size potential? They're one of nature's most adaptable animals, capable of feeding on a wide range of prey, from small fish to beasts as big as kangaroos.
They're feeding on things such as clams and crustaceans and even insects, fish, frogs, you name it, turtles. They're able to feed on a broad range if the opportunity presents itself, or if they're forced to do so just due to diminishing resources.
Crocodiles can also adjust their behavior to their environment, especially if they locate a good food opportunity.
And when crocodiles see an opportunity, they'll come back the next day, and if the same opportunity is there, they'll come back the next day, and they will learn very quickly that this is the place to be if you want to have any chance of catching food. But they can do even better than that. They can learn timings. They can learn, for example, that if a migration is happening during September or during April of a certain species of fish or a certain species of mammal, and that's the best time to catch them, you can guarantee that a couple of weeks before it happens, the crocodiles will start migrating into that area.
And if food isn't available, they can go months without eating. When they finally do eat, they use food efficiently, converting it into energy for growth. Crocodiles' extreme adaptability has helped them survive, while other species have gone extinct. Today, they remain the planet's last truly massive reptile. But recent fossil discoveries reveal a lineage of even larger crocodilians. In the 1990s, paleontologist Paul Sereno and a team of researchers stumble upon the find of a lifetime: the ultimate killerzilla, Sarcosuchus imperator, super croc.
Back about 15 years ago, I set foot in the Sahara. It was an exciting and very difficult expedition to try and open a Pandora's box of dinosaurs. But what was really eye-opening was the crocodiles. And in fact, the very first bone I found belonged to super croc. Then we found the skull. To see a 6-foot skull, something that is longer than you are when you lay down next to it, and realize that that's a crocodile, it is amazing. I mean, we marveled at it when we were in the field.
Roughly 110 million years ago, super crocs stalked the banks of a river, coursing through what is now arid land.
Super croc was an ultimate stealth predator, ambush predator. It had enormously powerful jaws and teeth that were like stubs. They were like hooks. They were definitely not designed for eating fish. They were designed for eating dinosaurs. They were designed for pulling dinosaurs down to the water, drowning them, ripping them apart. And the tail is like I don't know, it's like the trunk of a sequoia. It's too big to wrap your arms around. It's absolutely monstrous.
Well, they probably had bite forces perhaps as high as 20,000 pounds or something like that, and God knows what kind of pressures they were generating.
In his lab at the University of Chicago, Dr. Sereno continues to marvel at Super Croc's fossilized skull.
This is the most complete skull of a giant Super Croc ever found. It's 6 feet long, weighs about 700 pounds. The back end of the skull is here. Here's the two eye sockets. They're sort of raised up. Here's the snout. Here's the big opening for the nose. The animal is basically a magazine of teeth. This is the root. The dark part is the crown. This is the part that sticks out. This is a replacement tooth. So most of the tooth is actually in the jaw. When you put this into the skull, you realize that the snout is like a machine gun of teeth. There's teeth going down to each side, filling the snout, and they're being replaced all the time as they break off and wear. Just from the teeth, you can tell quite a bit about what the animal was eating, and this is not a fish-eating tooth. So this is the skull of a very large living crocodile. It's about 2 feet long, and this would be a crocodile that might be 17, 18 feet long. You can see how it pales into insignificance compared to this monster Super Croc skull. But they're designed very similarly.
So, how big was Super Croc?
They're about twice the size of the largest saltwater crocodiles, and probably somewhere in the region of about 10 times as heavy.
Well, we think Super Croc was 40 feet long as a full adult. Yes, a croc the size of a school bus. How much did it weigh? 8 tons is a good estimate. The largest crocodile to ever survive on Earth.
In Australia, croc catcher Robbie Risk and his partner are relocating 2 saltwater crocodiles from Darwin Harbor to a nearby croc farm.
Ah, here they are in their new home.
Here we go, yeah.
So, 2 nice crocs.
Yep.
2 very
Nice
nice
ones.
crocs.
One female, one male.
Oh, female, eh?
Yeah, one feet
Oh,
there.
they'll be very pleased with that.
Yep. We'll just lift them up and put them straight in. 2, 3.
I've got the light in.
Nice. 1, 2, 3.
With the crocs off the truck, Robbie heads back to the harbor to continue his work monitoring the traps.
Right, now there's a bit they're not going to like. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take a tissue sample from this crocodile. These
Dr.
tail
Britton
screws
hopes
here.
the tissue
You can see
samples
Robbie's
will
already
yield genetic
taken
material for his
tissue.
DNA map of Darwin's croc population.
And this is basically just cartilage, but it's got some genetic tissue in it. So what I'm going to do is use one of these biopsy punches and just take a bit of that tissue and store it in one of these vials. And then we're going to do some analysis on it to find out if we can determine where this crocodile came from. This is actually the first time I've used this technique. Okay, that works a bit better. Obviously stings a little bit, but for these crocodiles, they've got such thick skin. It's probably a bit like us having an injection. So that's the sample I've taken. It's just basically a hole through the scoot, and it's just connective tissue really, but we can get some genetic information from this. Stick it in there. So we can keep this for however long we need to, and then we send these down to the lab along with lots of others, and we should get some really useful information out of it.
Armed with his DNA data, his research may one day uncover where Darwin's saltwater crocs are breeding,
Should preserve them.
why they're moving, and how expanding into new habitat may help them grow to even larger sizes. With bodies built to survive, predatory expertise, indeterminate growth, and extreme adaptability, can today's saltwater crocodiles become tomorrow's super crocs?
I think the conditions are ready right now for a super croc. In warm climates, the very largest river systems, I think, could support a huge crocodile.
Temperature is certainly a factor for growth. These animals do have a fairly slow metabolism, but if the weather's warmer, they're going to be eating a lot more. It certainly could help them grow a lot larger.
Warming temperatures and large prey may drive crocodiles to even greater sizes.
If large prey evolved near the water's edge, I think it's quite plausible, possibly even likely, that giant crocodiles would evolve again.
But experts say there's one primary key to reaching the size of super croc: prolonged adolescence.
And what we found is that these animals took about, 35 to 40 years before they started slowing down their growth. Large crocodiles today, somewhere between 12 and 15 years, they'll start slowing down their growth. These giants was, maturing later and living a lot longer.
How did super croc get so big, 40 feet in length? Did it grow faster, or did it grow over a longer period of time? They just took longer to grow.
These giant crocodiles were growing at comparable rates to big crocodiles today. So they didn't necessarily grow faster, they just prolonged sort of their teenage years.
With the right circumstances and an extended adolescence, modern crocs may someday morph into future giants.
Body size is one of the easiest things for evolution to change. Just a handful of genes, a couple of glands going on and off at different times, and you can enlarge yourself beyond what you once were.
What happened during crocodilian evolution is on about, 6, 7, maybe even 8 occasions, crocodile lineages reached gigantic proportions, animals 35 feet or more. The propensity to become a giant is always present in the crocodilian lineages.
Life is not constant, life will change. And it may be possible that in the future, something as large and impressive and awesome as Sarcosuchus might one day exist again.
So, how big can it get? If future salties size up to super croc proportions, this is what a croczilla might look like. A fearsome predator clocking in at more than 12 meters, 7,000 kilograms. With a tail almost 5 meters long, a near 2-meter skull, teeth like railroad spikes, and jaws capable of biting down with over 9,000 kilos of pure predatory force. One colossal example of how big it can get. They find her remains. Bite marks indicate her killer was a crocodile, measuring about 3.5 meters. Trained crocodile catcher Robbie Risk was part of the search team.
That was a really emotional event. And that took about a day to find any remains. When we did, it was something that, you don't really want in your head.
Groups of armed officers scour the area, setting traps throughout the floodplain, but they never find the culprit croc. Though attacks like this are rare, salties probably kill about 6 people a year. Yet officials estimate there are up to 150,000 of them moving from rural tidal rivers into Darwin waters.
The unique thing about Darwin is that it's essentially a city that's situated right in the middle of crocodile habitat.
And as they spread to urban and suburban areas, the odds of attacks on humans may be increasing exponentially.
If most crocodiles in the tidal rivers here didn't move, they'd get killed by other crocodiles. There's just not enough food and there's not enough space to go around. And this is why you've got saltwater crocodiles moving along the coast towards Darwin. And more crocodiles every year are found in and around Darwin And obviously the potential for disaster is so much higher.
Accidental run-ins with wild crocodiles are an ever-present danger here. But there's an even more dangerous phenomenon. Rogue crocs that attack people on purpose.
Rogue crocodiles don't behave like normal crocodiles, and they represent a really very significant danger. Often rogue crocodiles are the kinds of animals which have successfully attacked someone. They realize how easy it is, and then they try and do the same thing again. And very much unlike other crocodiles, which tend to stay away from people, rogue crocodiles will try and seek people out.
Rogue crocodile is a problem crocodile. It's just got attitude and does, wants to kill everything, really.
To reduce the risk of an attack by a rogue or other saltwater crocodile, Darwin authorities operate an ongoing catch and remove management program. It was a powerful predator stalking unsuspecting prey at the water's edge.
And Sarcosuchus was doing the same sort of things as these modern crocodiles are doing, except it was doing it 100 million years ago.
Millions of years later, a modern croc still hunts like Super Croc and hunts similar habitat. Yet can it grow to its ancient ancestors' gargantuan size? How big can it get? Here in Darwin, in Australia's Northern Territory, one potential croczilla candidate dominates the region's tidal rivers and estuaries. Known locally as salties, these are the largest of the world's 23 species of crocodilians, saltwater crocodiles. The largest saltwater crocodile ever measured stretched over 6 meters long. Yet to outlast dinosaurs, you need more than monster size. You need a heavy-duty arsenal of survival traits. Salties have thick, armor-plated skin, muscular limbs, strong jaws lined with over 60 bone-crushing teeth, and powerful tails extending almost half their body length. It's one possible clue to their future size potential, honed to perfection by evolution. Crocodiles' bodies are designed to survive.
I mean, they could lose a limb, it doesn't matter. The dominant males are often missing a limb. You have an animal that's a survivor, and there's almost nothing that can get in its way.
It's almost like a Ferrari now. It's had so much refinement done to the general body plan of a crocodile that what you've got now is you've got, like, the best possible crocodile that you could possibly have.
Salty is your A1 predator, something to watch out for. They eat humans every year.
Very large, and they're certainly more than big enough to represent a danger to us.
News accounts report lethal attacks. In rural Darwin in 2009, while swimming with her sister and 2 friends near a swamp called the Black Jungle, an 11-year-old girl vanishes. Police mount a ground search for the girl. Helicopters scan the bush from the air. The next day, some prehistoric giant.
Very large, and they're certainly more than big enough to represent a danger to us.
And the secret to even larger size may lurk in their ancient DNA. Code for a truly monstrous croczilla.
The propensity to become a giant is always present in the crocodilian lineages.
I think the conditions are ready right now for a super croc.
$65 million years ago, a devastating extinction event wiped out most of the Earth's reptile giants. Today, one massive-bodied beast remains.
They avoided the extinction that nipped the dinosaurs in the bud, leaving only birds as descendants. It's really an incredible success story.
They're one of evolution's most incredible survivors, revered by some as gods, reviled by others as man-eaters.
So never underestimate a crocodile in the water. If you get too close to it, then really, that's the end of it.
Meet the world's largest reptile, the crocodile.
They might not be quite as long as some of the giant snakes, but they're actually a lot heavier than those giant snakes, so they are actually the biggest reptiles on Earth.
These prehistoric giants can grow to enormous sizes, yet fossil evidence reveals their ancient relatives grew even larger.
If you go back 100 million years, there were crocodiles that were almost twice the size and probably about 4 to 5 times the weight of the biggest crocodiles today.
In the late 1990s, paleontologists working in the Sahara Desert unearthed the bones of the largest crocodile ever known to roam the Earth, Super Croc.
Super Croc is the nickname. Sarcosuchus imperator, the imperial flesh croc. That is the technical name.
Super Croc was probably 40 feet long. It would have been an absolute monster.
Scientists think Super Croc, like today's crocs, a crocodile can grow as long as it lives. It's another clue to their future size potential. When most creatures mature, they reach a maximum size and growth stops. But crocodile size has no limits. It's a phenomenon known as indeterminate growth. In captivity, with a steady food supply and fewer survival challenges, crocodiles may be able to live longer and grow larger than crocs in the wild.
These animals pretty much grow until the day that they die, so it is possible that these animals are going to reach much greater sizes in captivity than they normally would in the wild.
One of the largest captive crocs ever recorded, a saltwater crocodile named Gomek, lived here at the St. Augustine Alligator Farm Zoological Park in Florida. Gomek maxed out at over 17 feet, weighing nearly a ton. He became a main attraction, drawing audiences to his feeding shows in droves. Today, his supersized legacy lives on in another huge salty named Maximo.
So he's over 15 feet long, 1,200 pounds. He's an incredibly powerful animal.
Working with carnivores as large as Maximo carries extreme risks. Zoo staff is always cautious.
I said he looks at us as a potential food source, so you certainly need to watch out for that. He's surprisingly quick for an animal his size. You can see the power in this animal when he jumps up after a rat. It's just something you really don't want to get too close to.
Maximo's size may be what draws onlookers to his enclosure. Yet like other crocodilians, his most remarkable trait may be intelligence.
Crocs are definitely the smartest of all the reptiles. They have the most well-developed cerebral cortex of any reptile, and they're a lot smarter than people think they are.
Crocodilians have a reptile-sized brain. I mean, it's literally the size of a walnut. And yet, they are incredibly smart animals for what they need to do. And some of what they do is pretty spectacular.
In the wild, crocs seem to have an eye for detail. They can read their surroundings and respond by changing their behavior.
You can go into an environment, be observed by...
We've caught over 170 crocs this year, compared to last year, which was about 140. So we have actually caught a fair bit this year. Might even break the record. What we're doing here is just checking and rebaiting the trap.
Croc catchers like Robbie monitor over 60 movable traps. They keep them baited, and when they find crocs inside, they remove them, mark them, and record their size. The largest salty Robbie's ever caught measured over 4.5 meters. But any size croc can do some damage.
3 meters, 4 meters can actually crush skulls and stuff like that.
When you work with crocodiles, you have to be very respectful of what they're capable of. And if it goes wrong, that's when you lose your hand, that's when you lose your arm, that's where potentially you could lose your life.
Today, crocodile specialist Dr. Adam Britton is riding along with Robbie. He's collecting DNA to help create a genetic map of Darwin's crocodiles.
What we're doing is we're taking tissue samples from crocodiles that we're catching in Darwin Harbour, and we're comparing them with tissue samples from crocodiles that we're going to be collecting across the northern coast of Australia. And what that's going to do, hopefully, is tell us a little bit about where the crocodiles that are moving into Darwin Harbour are actually coming from.
Dr. Britton's map may someday pinpoint a breeding colony of giants. But for now, his research is geared toward keeping the peace between humans and a potentially deadly crocodile species.
What we can learn about these crocodiles is why they're moving and what's motivating them to move. And if there's a risk of crocodile attack, then you have to try and reduce that risk. And hopefully we can figure out how to make it safer for people. And then people will be more likely to put up with crocodiles that live on their doorstep.
Well, here we are at number 2 trap in Darwin Harbour. Just going to give it a pull. As you can see, I've just tested the trap. The croc comes in. As he comes into the trap itself, he'll actually pull down on the meat, the bait, which triggers the door as old. So it's a pretty simple mechanism and it works pretty efficiently. All right, off to the next trap.
As the team heads off to check the next trap, they can only guess what size beast will take the bait.
Often seen, rarely photographed, never captured. It is called Yeti, Sasquatch, but most know the creature as Bigfoot. Now a team of top scientists search the globe, using the latest technology and their expert knowledge of the animal kingdom. They question the creature's very existence, uncover shocking new evidence, and wonder if we've been searching for the wrong creature all along. Join us for the definitive guide to Bigfoot. In 2009, more than 250 unexplained sightings of what was believed to be Bigfoot were recorded in North America. But they're the tip of the iceberg. Now, for the first time, we have created a global map of Bigfoot sightings. More than 10,000 from the last 200 years. At first, the sightings appear random, but closer scientific analysis reveals hidden but unmistakable patterns. More than 95% of all recorded sightings take place in Asia or North America. Nearly 70% of these are at high altitude and dense tree cover. There are also distinct hotspots where sightings are far more common than elsewhere. One is the Himalayas. Here, generations of eyewitnesses describe a gigantic snow ape, the Yeti. 2,000 miles south on the islands of Indonesia, locals talk of a wild ape man called Orang Pendek. While up in Central Asia, sightings of ancient Neanderthal-type humans go back centuries. And here in the wilderness of North America, they see a giant ape-like beast. Sasquatch. Vancouver, British Columbia. This booming city has a population of over 2 million people. But right on its doorstep is a vast wilderness. 62 million acres of ancient forest, much of which has never been logged. The wilds of British Columbia have one of the greatest concentration of Bigfoot encounters in the world, more than 400 in the last century. Here in the forests surrounding Chilliwack Lake in the summer of 2008, 3 sightings took place within 10 miles of each other. 2 on the same night. This driver is alone on a remote dirt road. He's never believed in Bigfoot, but he's about to see something that will profoundly challenge what he has previously regarded as fiction. This is the report he filed.
I was coming up the road here, in the lights. I seen something, like a bear almost. But I realized this couldn't be a bear. It seen me and immediately left. It moved like a ninja. Nothing can move like that.
Like hundreds of others, this eyewitness chose to remain anonymous for fear of being ridiculed. But his words are real. 3.5 hours later, another encounter takes place when a trucker spots an identical creature on the same stretch of road. The distance between the two sightings, just 1 mile. The local newspaper filed this report. Both eyewitnesses were convinced that what they saw was not a bear. 10 miles away, and 6 weeks later, a third encounter takes place in the forests around Chilliwack. This experienced hunter was out stalking deer off the Ruby Creek Forest Service Road. What happened next has haunted him ever since. Without warning, a rock hurls toward him.
I swung my upper body and my rifle over to the side, thinking that it was a bear, and it wasn't. It was a rock in mid-flight. It looked to be about 2 feet long. So I was looking to where it came from. Then I saw a flash of black, and it took off through the bush. It took it literally a couple of seconds from approximately this area here to about there.
There are no records of bears ever throwing rocks.
I come into contact with bears quite often, and it was not a bear. Didn't exactly want to find out what it was. I don't like knowing that there's something out there that can pick me up and use me as a toothpick. I spent the last 2 years trying to forget it ever happened.
These 3 encounters are just a small sample of the rich history of sightings in this area. Stories of rock-throwing wild men date back generations in the Chilliwack region. It's July 1934, and local Native American Tom Cedar is out fishing for trout. He's lived and hunted in this remote area all his life. But he's taken completely by surprise when what he reports to be a Sasquatch starts hurling rocks, trying to capsize his canoe. It's one of a series of attacks. And the first time local tribes share their long history of Sasquatch encounters with outsiders. This Sasquatch rock art from Northern California was painted in 500 AD. How do you explain hundreds of encounters stretching back over centuries? Something is out there, but what? Here in one of the world's Bigfoot hotspots, the forests of Canada, 5 of the world's leading scientists have come together to solve this global mystery. Field researchers and specialists, experts in discovering new species of primates, ancient humans, the habitats and behavior of the great apes, the fossil record, and the search for unidentified hominids. Their mission is to focus on how to find these unidentified creatures and establish once and for all if they exist.
This is one of the most intriguing questions of zoological exploration that faces science in this modern era.
Jeff Meldrum has first-hand experience of what may have been Bigfoot.
Did you hear that?
That rock was pretty good size. Let's stay here. We've had action. We've had rocks thrown at us.
In 2007, he was part of a team besieged by an unidentified rock-throwing creature in a remote Canadian cabin.
One of us was urinating off the porch when the first stone hit the side of the cabin.
I'm still shaking.
Teammate Ian Redmond has led several expeditions searching for evidence of the Yeti. He's convinced something unexplained is out there.
If you put aside the hoaxers and the ones that are clearly mistaken identity, there's still a nugget, which is why we're all here.
The team will concentrate on a fundamental principle. If Bigfoot is real, it must fit into our understanding of the natural world, meaning it must do everything other animals do, from feeding to finding a mate. The scientists first examine the best evidence available, video and film footage. There are hundreds of examples of this sort of evidence for Bigfoot. Their first task is to eliminate the hoaxes. This video shot near the Canadian town of Banff seems convincing enough, until you realize an identical creature was seen promoting a local business the night before.
What is that? Don't tell me that's a Yeti.
Then there are the videos where the images are so indistinct, they could be almost anything. Once they eliminate the obvious hoaxes and the images that are so blurred or out of focus to make any real identification possible, there's very little left. The experts are not so surprised.
Animals are there at home in their environment, and we're often the intruder, the visitor, and evading human detection is not that difficult.
Just how well animals can live undetected by man was proven by this incredible video footage shot in 2007. It's almost all the evidence we have of a new species of man-sized primate, the billy ape. Found in the remote forest of Congo, Africa, it took primatologists a year to track down and film these giant-sized 300-pound chimps. But local people had talked about them for generations. Anna Nakaris has discovered 6 new species of primates.
I believe very much in what local people say. And if local people tell me something is there, I have a suspicion that it may be, even if I haven't seen it.
The team points to the discovery of the billy ape as a positive indicator for Bigfoot. If a new species as large as this has managed to live undetected by science for so long, could other species of giant ape-like creatures still be out there? The team goes in search of answers, heading out into the heart of the densest clusters of Bigfoot sightings in the world. And they tackle the single most controversial piece of Bigfoot evidence ever. A team of leading scientists are searching for evidence of Bigfoot that cannot be dismissed. Their goal? To separate fact from fiction and create the definitive guide to this mysterious creature. Research has identified the forests of British Columbia as one of its most probable habitats. Now Ian Redmond takes the search directly into the field. He's one of the world's leading gorilla trackers and is using his highly trained eye to look for signs of an unknown species of ape. Redmond is on Vancouver Island, a place where sightings of Sasquatch are so common, it's sometimes nicknamed Ape Island. The first thing he uncovers is a mysterious structure, one of several found on different parts of the island. It's an example of what is often referred to as a Sasquatch stick structure.
It is intriguing. whatever did it meant to do it. It's not an accident of trees falling. We can look all around us and see the odd tree falling, but nothing like this structure, this stick structure, which is what they're referred to as. The great apes all build nests to sleep in. They sometimes interweave bamboo stems that are this sort of thickness and therefore impossible for a man alone to break. And they form a platform above the ground to sleep on. But that doesn't look like anyone slept in it. It's just an interesting structure.
But if it isn't a nest, what could it be?
Ah, but that is interesting because it was broken off before it fell.
Redmond suspects another motive for the structure, which is also common in gorilla behavior.
If its intention is to tell other Sasquatch that there's a powerful male here and he can break off sticks, that would be an interesting interpretation. If its intention is to warn humans not to enter into the Sasquatch territory, I don't think it's working. This is going to intrigue us all the more.
While the stick structures may not be conclusive, the fact is, the global map indicates that sightings in this area date back more than a century. One of Vancouver Island's hotspots is the area around the small town of Duncan, and sightings continue right up to the present day. It was 5 miles from here in 2005 that a local resident had what he describes as an encounter with a giant ape-like creature. Corey Combs is a local dirt bike rider. He grew up in and around the forests of central Vancouver Island. One June evening, he was out on his motorbike when he saw what he believes to have been a Sasquatch, face to face.
Set up camp, had a fire going. Got kind of late, and, you know, I could hear the bushes moving and branches breaking, but I didn't think much about it. But the noises, they kept coming, and I had that sense of something was watching me. And we got our flashlight going, and the batteries are just about to die. And all I remember was seeing the light shine on its face before the battery died. And that was the instant that I knew exactly what was watching me, that it was indeed Sasquatch. Very distinctive facial features, you know, real broad cheeks, and very predominant eyebrow structure. The face of what looked like an ape. It turned, and then it was gone. And it just left me in just pure terror.
In June 2006, another alleged Sasquatch encounter took place 17 miles west of Duncan. Alan Robertson had pulled onto the roadside with his boat on a trailer when what he thinks could have been a giant ape suddenly attacked.
We stopped, you know, do a pee break, but then everything started shaking inside the truck. My stepson says, "We're rolling backwards, we're rolling backwards." I said to him, "No, I've got my foot on the brake, I'm in park." This fear came over me. The safety chain was just hanging. The boat itself was twisted in its cradle, and there was 3 cracks here and 2 cracks here. Even now, when you think back, it just, I get, you know, shivers.
A third nighttime encounter with what the witness thought was a giant ape took place in June of 2009 on Mount Sicker, 6.5 miles from Duncan. Andrew DeWall was out putting his 4x4 through its paces on a forest road when he pulled in at the top of the mountain to check out the spectacular early evening view. But as he turned to an area of recently logged trees, he saw something he couldn't believe.
It looked like your typical picture of a Sasquatch that you'd see on a commercial. It had the flat face, the long draped hair, his arms were down by his knees. It popped up from behind that stump, just kind of came up, They had moved up into about that range, and I just kind of laughed it off, you know? You don't expect to see something like that walking on two legs through the bush. So we got out of the truck, I picked up some rocks and I threw them off the corner of my Jeep, and then from the back corner of my vehicle, something yelled at us. Sounded like 20 dogs perfectly in sync, barking at once. It's kind of like a punch in the back of the head. And that's when we both kind of got scared and drove out of here.
Sasquatch howling like a pack of dogs sounds far-fetched, but gorillas also bark. An important factor linking all three of these Vancouver Island encounters is that they all took place after sundown. Apes don't have night vision, so how could Bigfoot be active at night?
What they could be good at is seeing in the moonlights, because the forest in the moonlight is very similar to the forest at dawn and dusk, and you can see a lot in a full moon. And so if you're clever and you're an ape, most apes are very clever, it'd be a great time to think you could avoid competition by being adapted to those periods.
Ian Redmond now joins a team of local Bigfoot researchers on a moonlit stakeout. Cindy Dawson leads them. Her determination to find the truth comes from personal experience.
I was on a game trail and 2 deer come flying up the trail, and I took that as a high alert that something's following them. This animal started vocalizing at me. The sound was so strong, I could feel it, and I was probably 200 feet away. It was like a yell, scream, roar, all in one sentence.
Tonight, Cindy's hoping she'll hear Sasquatch again. Her team have come equipped with a high-tech listening device and an advanced night vision camera to perhaps capture its image.
The reports suggest that they are often active at night, but the visibility, even in daytime here, is only going to be a few yards in any direction. So it's probably going to be sound that alerts us to their presence.
One twilight behavior other local researchers have noticed is tree knocking.
Sasquatch apparently respond to this because they say that if you sort of thwack twice, you'll get 2 taps coming back. And that's communicating.
This unusual behavior has been reported in other apes, notably chimps. While they wait for a reply, the researchers try another tactic, known to provoke a response from what they think is Sasquatch. A long call that they believe mimics the call made by females of the species. Incredibly, against all odds, a faint reply. But the researchers are confused. Replaying it again and again, it sounds like it's mimicking field expert Cindy Dawson. It sounds almost human. The next morning, Ian Redmond explores the area for signs of a great ape having passed through. What does he think of last night's distant cry?
When we heard from some distance behind us a reply, of course, the reaction was immediate. It was extremely exciting, but Cindy was very calm and didn't show immediate excitement at the reply. And I guess she was being cautious because it sounded human-like.
While they investigate further, Jeff Meldrum tries a new technique he hopes will uncover solid evidence. He's teamed up with Bigfoot researcher and habitat specialist John Mayanzinski. They've gone back to the drawing board and come up with a new and untried method for finding Sasquatch: tracker dogs.
Well, these detection dogs are used quite commonly in search and rescue efforts, but also in recovery efforts, finding the remains of a deceased hiker or hunter.
If dogs like these can be trained to locate human remains, they could, in theory, be trained to find the remains of Sasquatch. The most difficult part of the training is finding something that may give the dogs the creature's scent.
Our first sample came from a mountain range in Washington State, about 20 years old now. The other sample is much more recent. This is about 2 months old. It comes from the Rockies, and it was also associated with tracks.
It's a tough call. The experts can't be sure if the samples are genuine, nor that they give off enough scent to potentially train the dogs to hunt for remains. The two dogs take it in turns to try and pick up scent from either of the samples. The first dog detects nothing. But the second dog registers a definite scent on the second sample.
We have to depend on handlers, and they're telling us that we're getting a distinctive reaction from the dogs that indicates this is not a species of animal they've encountered before.
The fact that these dogs are reacting in ways that suggest this isn't either animal that they would be otherwise familiar with or not quite human is very promising.
The team needs to investigate what kind of creature they're looking for. Searching for clues, they'll take on the most controversial evidence in the history of Bigfoot, the Patterson film. But can they come to a final conclusion?
If there were no hoaxes, there we have a Sasquatch.
It is one of the greatest mysteries of our time, the search for a creature known as Bigfoot. Now 5 of the world's leading experts in natural history have come together to create the definitive guide to Bigfoot. Their goal? To see if there is proof that a creature is still out there. Our team has decided to examine the most controversial piece of evidence in existence. It consists of 953 frames of 16mm footage, known as the Patterson film. About 40 seconds of silent footage that has galvanized the world. It was shot here, Northern California, 6 Rivers National Park, Bluff Creek. Here in the fall of 1967 begins the greatest Bigfoot mystery of them all. As our team watches, primate experts Ian Redmond and Anna Nakaris point to the way the creature walks as a convincing argument for the film's authenticity.
It's very relaxed, very flowing gait, clearly comfortably walking bipedally. There's no question of awkwardness.
Interesting to see how the creature is swinging its arms quite strongly from side to side. That's something almost more than I'd expect to see even from a gibbon.
Team members Bill Sellers and Jack Rink remain skeptical. They focus on the man who shot the film and why.
For me, this clip is really all about trust. If you saw a clip of film like this from an impeccable source that you believed, then you'd have to take it at face value. This is, a hairy creature walking across the screen. If you don't trust the person who's actually taking the pictures, and you don't trust that it's not a hoax, it doesn't really matter how convincing it looks, because we know that Hollywood special effects and things can recreate almost anything, and it's very difficult to tell.
The man behind the camera was Roger Patterson. Numerous people question his motives, including journalist Mike McLeod.
Roger Patterson was a really interesting guy. He never had a real job, never wanted a real job. He was an inventor, and by all reports, quite really an artist with his hands. And he always felt that he was going to, one of his inventions was going to pay off.
Many think the Bigfoot of Bluff Creek was one of Patterson's inventions.
He thought it was possible that something like this could be out there, and that if he could find it, it would be an incredible thing. It'd be like one of the inventions he'd been chasing for so long. He started making these trips on horseback up into the mountains and talking to people in that area, and he came out with a book in 1966.
His book contained a sketch of a creature uncannily similar to the one he caught on film just over a year later. Could this have been the prototype? Roger Patterson's ambitions went much further than writing a book. He borrowed money to direct a Bigfoot movie.
He was buying cameras and film footage and raw stock and horses.
It was while preparing to shoot his movie that Patterson claims to have caught a female Sasquatch on camera, totally by chance. It all sounds too good to be true. Since then, the film has been subjected to 40 years of scientific scrutiny. From biometric analysis of the creature's gait and stride length, to markers showing its height in the natural environment, no one has managed to prove it's a fake. Examining a digitally enhanced section of the film for themselves, the team can see why.
Interesting that they chose a female. I think that's a more difficult thing to fake, is that female anatomy, and it looks pretty natural. And so if it is a costume or if it is a suit, I think they've done it pretty well.
If Roger Patterson wanted to create a hoax, why would he go to the trouble of creating an anatomically correct female? Ian Redmond agrees. The film seems too realistic to be a fake creature, created by a rookie filmmaker.
The bits of the anatomy just look very convincing. There appears to be shorter hair, slightly lighter hair around the waist. It just looks like the way a silverback's back narrows in a little bit and has that short hair there compared to the longer hair on the arms. It just looks like a silverback. And in 1967, most people had not seen photographs of gorillas. I think it's a very exciting bit of film.
But the team disagree on the head turn.
The part that really bothers me the most is the turn to look towards the camera. Looks so human to me.
But after hundreds of hours tracking gorillas in the wild, Ian Redmond is intimately familiar with how they move.
If you work with great apes, you see that many of those mannerisms, the way you stop, listen, look, are actually shared by all the great apes, human and non-human.
This remarkable footage of a gorilla, shot in a wildlife park, shows how closely they can resemble humans when walking on two legs. But journalist Mike McLeod thinks he has the story that shatters the Patterson myth.
Roger Patterson was broke and he had to provide for his family. And if you're making a film, you can spend a lot of money real quick. And he went through that money zippity. I think he went down and shot that film in California because he just needed to get, that was the money shot. He needed the money shot because any film about Bigfoot, it ain't going to sell unless you got the money shot, and the money shot is the creature. Nobody's ever found a suit. It was either made of cowhide or it may have been rented from a costume rental studio. But in any case, he really brought his artistic sensibilities to the film he shot in 1967, which has become an icon.
Jeff Meldrum disagrees.
This is anything but just a man in a fursuit. There wasn't spandex, there wasn't Velcro, there wasn't anything but relatively cheap costume fur available, especially to an amateur who might be trying to pull off a hoax. If it's a hoax, it really stands as one of the most sophisticated accomplishments of its time.
I have to disagree, actually. It's not. I mean, to me, I look at it, and given its history and so forth, you know, it shrieks at me, man in suit. It really does.
Roger Patterson went to his grave, taking the truth with him, swearing both his film and Sasquatch were real.
I don't think it's incongruous that Roger Patterson would believe that a creature like that existed and then go out and shoot a fake film. It's actually quite interesting. That's his vision of what it looked like.
The team remained divided. Two believe it could really be a Sasquatch. Two are unconvinced. One is undecided. But as our global map reveals, real or fake, one incredible fact is certain. In the years after Roger Patterson's film, places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Texas, and Montana, who have almost no previous history of Bigfoot sightings, have become sightings hotspots. In just 10 years, there are more sightings than in the previous 150, and they just keep coming. Can all these eyewitnesses really be seeing Bigfoot?
In my experience, hoaxes have been actually very few and far between, and the challenge that we face is sifting the misidentifications, the over-imagination of enthusiastic investigators for whom every bump in the night, every call in the forest is evidence of Sasquatch activity.
It's a bit like the Loch Ness Monster. Anyone who sees a lump in the water hopes that's what they're seeing.
The team decides to investigate this massive surge. One of the places with the greatest rise in sightings of Bigfoot-like creatures is Florida. Here, locals claim to encounter a type of Bigfoot they call the skunk ape, because of its terrible smell. In December 2000, these two photographs were sent to the Sarasota Sheriff's Department. They allegedly show a 5 to 6 foot tall skunk ape that broke into someone's garden. Is this creature fact, fiction, or a case of mistaken identity? Florida's tropical swamp is an ideal habitat for an ape, but the scientists are highly skeptical it's Bigfoot.
There's a whole huge menagerie of pets that have been released, particularly in South Florida.
We know that primates can thrive in these habitats, and chimpanzees are extremely adaptable, and there's a lot of food they can be eating in Florida.
Keeping chimps and orangutans as pets became fashionable in the 1970s, just when sightings of the skunk ape took off.
A very common issue is for people to buy a baby or an infant primate, keep it until it's a bit older and stronger, and often they're purchased illegally or they're held without a license. And all it takes is 2 or 3 to start a population.
They live a long time. I mean, a chimpanzee can easily live to be 60 years old, and so you only have to have a few releases, perhaps, you know, decades ago, and the odd sighting, and that would certainly keep alive a rumor of a skunk ape for a long, long time.
The team believes the huge surge of skunk ape sightings in Florida, more than 200, are a case of mistaken identity triggered by Roger Patterson's film. Sightings of skunk ape are probably nothing more than an escaped chimp. But not all clusters are as easily explained. The biggest hotspot the team cannot dismiss is the Pacific Northwest, a region that stretches from Northern California up through Oregon, Washington State, and well into Canada. This area has an unbroken history of sightings. It is from this region that the word Sasquatch originates, and local Native Americans describe sightings of a tribe of hairy giants that date back centuries. This ancient wisdom may be the key to solving the mystery of Bigfoot. A team of scientists is searching for definitive evidence of Bigfoot. Having examined the famous 1967 film by Roger Patterson, they found it caused a massive surge in sightings. But some areas were more affected than others. The team's global map shows them that hundreds of sightings in the Pacific Northwest took place long before Patterson's film, making them potentially far more reliable than sightings reported elsewhere in the years after. A key hotspot is the area around the town of Chilliwack in British Columbia. There were a cluster of sightings here in the early 1930s and 40s. One of the best documented encounters took place in July 1934 in a remote forest on the edge of the Chehalis Indian Reserve. Millie Saw and a friend are at home. Tonight they will encounter a creature they thought was only a local legend. The two women report a giant hairy hand at their window and being trapped for the whole night by a monstrous creature. It's an untarnished record from impeccable witnesses. And they're not alone. As we move forward in time on the global map, the reports from around Chilliwack just keep coming in increasing numbers. September 1941. This is Jenny Chapman and her young children. They're a respectable folk, known and trusted in the local community. It's a typical afternoon. The kids are playing, and Jenny is hanging her laundry. Her husband, Jack, is at work on the railroad. They're alone. Their home is miles from the nearest town. The forest is close and dense. And something is out there.
Come here, come behind me.
Jenny knows it's not a bear.
Come here, stay behind me.
And it certainly isn't human. She only knows it is a creature she has never seen before. Jenny Chapman and her children flee for their lives. Jack Chapman arrives home at dusk.
Sarah! Sarah! Johnny! Johnny!
He finds strange reddish-brown hair snagged on the high door lintel. The house has been ransacked. A 300-pound fish barrel has been lifted, broken apart, and the fish stolen. Realizing his wife and children are missing, he runs into the forest. Jack Chapman eventually finds his family taking refuge in the nearby town. The family never returns to the homestead. If the creature exists, the team agrees the Pacific Northwest might be one of the few places in the world with enough wilderness and resources to support a large omnivorous ape the size of Bigfoot. But there are some crucial questions they need to answer.
One of the things you need to work out is actually what they eat, particularly what they might eat during the winter when, you know, food is presumably not very good supply. And the sort of the equivalent animal that you might think of would be something like a bear, which of course can hibernate. But the larger primates, really, it's not something that they can do. So you need a food supply
Right. And in the Pacific Northwest, I mean, one thing to bear in mind that the coastal forests of British Columbia, for example, has very little snow accumulation during the winter. And so there are thousands of miles of coastline through that inside passage up into southeastern Alaska that actually is a very rich habitat and provides a lot of food resources throughout the year.
Yeah, things like shellfish and
Shellfish and kelp and all the invertebrates that are available in the tide pools.
The ransacking of the Chapman's house suggests Sasquatch has an appetite for fish. If so, it wouldn't be the only primate to eat seafood. Several species of monkeys eat mollusks they find in shallow water. But Sasquatch are frequently seen far inland at much higher altitudes. Surviving here would require Sasquatch to live on hard-to-process foodstuffs, like sedge grass, leaves, even bark. This in turn would require a specially adapted gut.
A very long gut with a long passage time allows them to process coarser food items, leaves and so forth, that would be unavailable to many other animals that inhabit the western United States. It's not out of the realm of possibility whatsoever.
But do sightings of Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest match up with the best food zones for a large omnivorous ape? Using the global map, the team compares sightings with the best possible habitats. They match up almost perfectly.
Well, there's a lot of links between altitude, precipitation, and temperature, and also with vegetation. So if you get more rain, you tend to get more vegetation. So we're seeing them in the northwestern rainforest.
The whole team agrees that a giant omnivorous ape could survive in the Pacific Northwest. But they need to consider a crucial question. How did a giant ape get to North America? Seeking answers, they look to Asia and sightings of another famous unknown creature, the Yeti. Searching for evidence of Bigfoot, a team of scientists has been exploring the Pacific Northwest. They found an ideal habitat for an omnivorous great ape. Now they investigate reports of similar creatures in Asia, searching for links between them and an answer to how Bigfoot got to North America. Their first Asian location, the mighty Himalayas, the highest mountain range in the world. It's home to what local peoples know and fear as the Yeti. From our global map, our experts can see a tight cluster of sightings at altitudes over 9,000 feet above sea level, with an annual snow and rainfall of 40 inches. The most important evidence for Yeti is footprints. In 1951, climber Eric Shipton was at a height of 20,000 feet during an expedition to Mount Everest, when totally unexpectedly, he came across these ape-like giant prints. With no other humans living even remotely nearby, he was convinced they must have been genuine. Jeff Meldrum has a cast of the original Shipton footprint, and he's convinced it definitely came from a real creature.
It's quite distinctive in that the large toe is divergent from the remaining toes. A more thumb-like appendage. The Shipton footprint is further enigmatic in the fact that the second toe is quite enlarged. This may be a natural feature, or it could also be a pathology. We don't really know, since only a single footprint was documented.
It seems extremely unlikely that someone would add an injury to a faked footprint. And even more improbable that they would fake footprints on a remote snowfield more than 20,000 feet up in the Himalayas. The trouble is, this seems an unlikely habitat for a giant ape.
I mean, primates are basically tropical animals. The sort of temperate, very cold areas that you see Yeti in are really very different from what you'd expect to see with a modern primate.
But there are exceptions. These Japanese macaques live at an altitude of over 10,000 feet and further north than any known primate. They've adapted to survive in temperatures of -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Could Yeti have adapted to live in the same environment?
There are other primates that are adapted for high altitudes, and they have very huge home ranges.
I don't think Yetis live in the snowfields. I think they pass through the snowfields and they spend most of the time foraging in the forest where the food is. And on my one visit to Nepal, I was impressed by the number of food plants that were the same as mountain gorilla food plants.
Yeti's available diet and its footprints suggest it could be a creature closely related to a giant mountain gorilla. But locals say they have seen it tearing yaks and goats apart with claws. This seems impossible because apes don't have claws. Ian Redmond's experience on expedition suggests there may be a simple explanation.
I found the carcass of a wild goat, which had been eaten by a predator, and there were big cat prints nearby. But I would think that any intelligent hominid coming across a carcass killed by another predator would immediately avail himself of it.
Rather than kill yaks and goats itself, Yeti could be a scavenger. The team has little other evidence to go on. Tibetan and Nepalese monks treasure Yeti hairs and bones as sacred artifacts. Some samples have been analyzed for DNA, but so far, almost all have been identified as belonging to other known animals. But the Yeti isn't the only unknown giant creature in this isolated part of the world. Less than 300 miles from Mount Everest, in the mountainous jungles of the Garo Hills of northern India, there is a long history of sightings of an almost identical creature, called locally the Mande Barum.
Local people encounter them all the time. They see them in the forest. They say in general they're quite gentle, that they don't really harm you, but they're still extremely afraid of them.
Descriptions of the Mande Barum and the Yeti show such close similarities. Team member Ian Redmond thinks they are the same species, just adapted to different environments.
I think of it as the lowland Yeti. It's not up in the snowfields, it's down in hot, steamy tropical forests of northern India.
Evidence for this lowland Yeti is even more difficult to track down.
It's actually very good luck to get a piece of it. And so by the time anybody goes to investigate it, villagers have come from miles around and ripped off a token. And it's almost like a relic, a little piece of a saint. You never see a whole body, but you occasionally see the scalp or you see a finger bone. And in fact, local ranger he had a finger bone, and he wanted to have it submitted for DNA analysis to see what it was. And he gave it to the Department of Wildlife, and they thought it would bring mockery to the department, and so it disappeared.
I think what this does, though, is highlight fear of ridicule, because anyone who's seen any of these things is likely to keep quiet about it because they'll be mocked.
1,000 miles east, in China, is what may be a third variety of Yeti. A creature the Chinese call the Yeren. In the mountainous forests of central China is a cluster of 200 sightings. But these are just reports from the last few decades. Legends of encounters with the Yeren, or wild man, date back to 200 BC. Yeren, Yeti, and Mande Barum, three almost identical Bigfoot-type creatures, all sighted within a few hundred miles of each other. The theory is they could all be linked and shared the same ancestor, a giant ape that lived in Asia in the past. Remarkably, discovered only a few hundred miles south of these three clusters of sightings, is fossil evidence of a giant prehistoric ape. Called Gigantopithecus, for centuries its teeth were used as ingredients in Chinese medicine.
Gigantopithecus was first discovered by these molars that were being sold in Chinese apothecaries as dragon's teeth, and turned out to be big ape molars, and then a bit of mandible was found, I understand, and if you kind of put that together, it seems that it was a large gorilla-like ape.
It was using bone samples like this that team member Jack Rink, a specialist in fossil dating, worked out how long ago Gigantopithecus lived.
Well, to the best of our knowledge, Gigantopithecus's last known occurrence was about 300,000 years ago in southwest China. So that's your geographical and your temporal location for the last sighting in the fossil record.
This means Gigantopithecus was still alive at the time of our Stone Age ancestors.
There's almost no possibility that humans and Gigantopithecus did not encounter each other. So I really firmly believe that there has to have been interaction between these two primates.
The majority of the team believe that if the Yeti and Asia's other reported giant apes exist, they are almost certainly descendants of Gigantopithecus. But is the North American Sasquatch? Today, Asia and North America are separated by the Pacific Ocean. But many times over the last million years, a temporary land bridge has formed between Siberia and Alaska as sea levels have changed. It's possible a giant ape could have migrated across this precarious plateau of land into North America. But there's another creature that could also have made this journey. Now the team investigates evidence that sightings of Sasquatch might not be a giant ape, but a species much closer to man. One summer afternoon in 2007, Robert Wilson was driving in a heavily forested area on Vancouver Island. He didn't know it, but the area had a long history of Bigfoot sightings. Suddenly, he caught sight of something totally unexpected.
At a place called Maureen Creek, I'd just gone over the bridge when I saw through the trees what I thought was a bear. Slowed down and saw what I can only describe as a large, hairy man who looked caveman-like, if you wish, or sort of a Neanderthal features. As big as a bear, you know, easily. But it wasn't a bear, it had human features. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I could see very, very clearly.
Wilson's incredible sighting points to the possibility that Sasquatch may not be a giant ape at all, but could be some kind of prehistoric human. Our experts' global map reveals hundreds of sightings of giant Neanderthal-like humans all across Asia. The greatest concentration of these is in the Caucasus Mountains, south of Russia. These sightings became so numerous that over time the creatures were given a name. They are called Almas, or Almasti, meaning wild people. One of the most compelling and reliable of all the reports about the Almas was documented in 1925. General Mikhail Stepanovich Topilsky of the Russian Red Army attempted to surprise what he'd been informed were rebel soldiers hiding in a remote cave. The Russians could hear something moving inside. To their horror, the general and his men discovered they had gunned down not a modern enemy, but some sort of prehistoric human.
The dead creature lay with his eyes open and his teeth bared. In general, the hair was very thick, without any underfur. The knees were completely bare of hair, and there were callous growths on them. The color of the face was dark. The nose was flat, with a deeply sunken bridge.
Well, the eyewitness descriptions of the Almas, a heavily muscled body with a thick torso, deep-set eyes and heavy brows and very prominent cheekbones and thick jaws, could easily represent a Neanderthal.
But Neanderthals were only one of what we are now discovering to be a whole range of different types of early human.
So one of the really interesting things about human evolution that we're now finding is that it's not a kind of evolutionary tree. It's more what we call an evolutionary bush. And there are lots of little side branches. There are lots of cousins of humanity that didn't go anywhere.
Evidence for other primitive human-type creatures has been increasing dramatically. In fact, fossil evidence of a human relative has been found on the island of Flores in Southeast Asia. And it shows that this creature was alive until recently. Unlike the Almasty, they are very small. But they too are a separate species from modern man. Scientists named the creature Homo floresiensis.
Homo floresiensis, the Hobbit, is always described as an example of island dwarfism. So this is an animal that's found itself on an island with none of the normal competitors that we'd normally have. And there is no need for it to be big anymore. Nothing's going to eat it because there are no predators. And so the particular ecology it's in is favoring being small.
Fossils of this real-life hobbit date to 10,000 years ago. But locals on nearby Sumatra have long spoken of a legendary small forest man they call Orang Pendek. Could this be the same creature? Or perhaps an even more primitive subspecies? Anna Nakaris has worked extensively in Southeast Asia, where she has discovered new species of primates. She's convinced local people's stories of Orang Pendek are reliable and of a real creature.
Local people can be extremely reliable, and there is a lot to say in listening to the stories of the people that live in these remote places.
The thing that's so fascinating to me is the life that's been breathed into the legend, so to speak, by the recent discovery of the Homo floresiensis, the hobbit. You know, the prospect of a relic population of hominid or another type of primate might not be so far-fetched.
Incredibly, just as these local stories have proved Orang Pendek might have a basis in fact, so too, new evidence reveals what might be the remains of the real-life Almasty. In March 2010, an amazing new discovery was made on the borders of Russia and Kazakhstan, in the same region as the 1925 encounter. From just a single finger bone, scientists identified yet another type of human species. They're calling it the X-woman, or Homo denisova.
So we've got this X-woman that's just been identified just from a finger bone that we've extracted DNA from. And the DNA in this finger bone is sufficiently different from the DNA that we've extracted from other modern humans and from Neanderthals that we think it was probably from a completely different species. So in fact, having multiple species of humanity is probably the norm.
Scientists now think Homo denisova was a cousin of Homo floresiensis. Some of the team believe remnants of multiple species of humans could still be living today.
These days, we seem not to be able to imagine that we can be living side by side with another bipedal creature, whereas in fact we did for 1 million years. And that was only discovered for certain in the 1980s.
Exactly. Why would the present be the exception to the rule that has seemed to prevail for literally millions of years?
An astonishing new discovery in China may supply the team with another possible candidate in their search to explain Bigfoot. A giant ancestor of Neanderthal called Homo heidelbergensis. Until recently, heidelbergensis was believed to have gone extinct more than 250,000 years ago. But according to Jeff Meldrum, these newly unearthed remains may completely rewrite these dates.
It's remarkable because the preliminary dates have been placed at about 12,000 years ago, which is extremely recent.
This find suggests heidelbergensis was still alive in Asia when the first modern humans were migrating to North America. Like them, it could have crossed the land bridge that once connected Siberia and Alaska. Next, the team examined if the North American Sasquatch could really be a type of primitive human. In their quest to find definitive evidence of Bigfoot, a team of scientists is examining the possibility that the creature may be a type of early human. They've been investigating a potential suspect called Homo heidelbergensis, a giant ancestor of Neanderthals, which could have crossed into North America from Asia. They turned to one of the earliest written records of an encounter with Bigfoot. Could it be the same creature? (1891). Herman Gilbert and his brother-in-law have come west to stake a claim for land. They're in Northern California, at the southern end of the Cascade Mountains. This is the same area where Roger Patterson will shoot his famous film of a giant ape-like creature 76 years later. But from all accounts, what they're about to witness may not be an ape, but some kind of human. Both men have already heard the local stories of the What Is It, a legendary local monster to be avoided at all costs. Herman discovers signs of it first, giant footprints. Bones and gore litter the area. The smell is overpowering. Then they spot the creature itself. A huge, hairy man, bathed in blood, beating its chest and wailing in anger. Like others who have seen it before them, Gilbert and his brother-in-law flee. This early story of Sasquatch clearly describes a Neanderthal-like man. One possible candidate for Bigfoot is an ancestor of Neanderthal called Homo heidelbergensis. Heidelbergensis was the biggest known ancient human. We have specimens a towering 6.5 feet tall, but there could easily be others that were much taller. But Jeff Meldrum thinks Sasquatch behavior is far too wild to be explained as that of a human.
In the case of heidelbergensis, given its degree of sophistication, intelligence, cultural evolution, it seems unlikely that it would have simply abandoned all of those trappings of humanity to adopt an austere life in the wild.
But some of the team disagree and think it may be because it's an early human and has kept some of its human-like traits that we can't find it. It may still practice human rituals, like burying its dead.
Perhaps they bury them in unmarked graves. They don't just die and rot in the forest. There is some ceremony involved. That would account for not finding remains.
Maybe due to competition, these large-brained, intelligent human species are really doing their best to avoid humans. And so they've gone more or less into a cryptic behavior, operating at a time when we don't see them or in habitats we don't choose.
But sometimes our worlds do cross, as the Chapmans found out when their house was ransacked in 1941. It's likely Homo heidelbergensis could easily lift and smash a 300-pound barrel of fish. Fossils show heidelbergensis had much thicker bones than a modern human.
Bone's expensive, so if you've got thick bones, then you're going to have fairly big muscles to operate these things. Thick bones, big muscles, and therefore you were stronger.
This stronger frame and muscles could also explain how the creatures have regularly been reported to run at speeds of 30 miles per hour.
Sprinters, it's all about power. It's all about having kind of a bigger engine. So that's sort of more muscle for your weight. Perhaps they were built for sprinting.
Today's fastest sprinters average 6.3 feet tall and run at 27 miles per hour. A super strong 6'5" heidelbergensis could easily be faster. And that's not all. Native American stories of Sasquatch describe hairy, rock-throwing men, which closely match the description of heidelbergensis. The tribes of the Pacific Northwest also report the Sasquatch's attraction to human women. These stories stretch back centuries, but even today, they remain protective of women when they believe Bigfoot is at large.
When non-tribal people visit those locations where they take special care and they escort the females back to their vehicles and make sure that they are safely off the reservation. And I've personally been escorted off a reservation because they believed that there was a Bigfoot in the location.
One woman who says she knows what it's like to be pursued by a Sasquatch is Cindy Dosen. In April 2008, she was out in the forest around Maple Mountain, Vancouver Island, when an unidentified giant creature pursued her.
It was in the bush, breaking limbs and smashing trees, about 2 steps behind me.
She fled for her life.
This thing screaming and hollering at me. I need to hide, get out of the way. It was like it was hurting me or pushing me along.
The creature chased Cindy several hundred yards until she reached the safety of her 4x4 and sped off.
And when I got into my car, I started crying. I just fell apart. And I wouldn't go back out in the woods for up to 3 weeks. I just would not. There's just no way.
Was this a close encounter with a lone male Sasquatch searching for a mate? Some First Nation legends go as far to say Sasquatch had children by human women.
There is oral tradition that it's happened in the past. They do talk about that offspring have been produced, and the child will only usually live a very short period of time due to rapid growth. It's usually very slow, can't learn the language, doesn't learn any traditions.
But if Sasquatch really is a heidelbergensis, mating with a human might not be as far-fetched as you might think. Recent genetic research has revealed early modern humans mated successfully with Neanderthals. Many people today still carry Neanderthal genes. The team has assessed a body of evidence that supports the idea that Sasquatch could be an ancient human. Height, strength, speed, even sexual attraction all make more sense if Sasquatch is a type of oversized heidelbergensis. But Professor Jack Rink is about to propose a dramatic, never-before-revealed theory that suggests Bigfoot isn't an ancient species, but a type of modern human that has transformed itself into a creature of the wild. Our scientists believe there are most likely two explanations for Bigfoot, if it exists. The first is that it's a giant ape descended from a prehistoric creature called Gigantopithecus. The second, it's an unidentified species of ancient human, possibly a Homo heidelbergensis. But now the team investigates a third possibility, a new theory that focuses on the Pacific Northwest. Could sightings of Sasquatch be explained not by giant apes or prehistoric men, but by modern-day humans? Based on research into the Native American Squamish Nation, Jack Rink has learned of the secretive training rituals that must be undertaken by the tribe's shamans.
One of the aspects of the Squamish Nation oral tradition is that people become literally wild people through shamanic processes where they have to go off and stay isolated for periods of over 10 years, eating wild foods, being isolated from the other parts of their tribe. So the living wild people apparently do exist.
The clues that helped reveal this groundbreaking evidence were uncovered on the rugged shoreline of British Columbia by one of the Squamish Nation's foremost scholars, Professor Rudy Reimer. Reimer was searching for stone tools used by his ancestors when they first settled the area more than 10,000 years ago.
People picked up local rocks and modified them for plant gathering and hunting and a whole wide range of other activities.
But he kept finding stone tools in out-of-the-way places, and intriguingly, many appeared to have been in use in recent times.
When we did find them, they were in odd locations. They were in remote, hard-to-access areas. And to me, as a First Nations person, as an archaeologist, I began thinking about those sites in a different way.
Why were these tools being discovered in such out-of-the-way places? Rudy Reimer realized the sites he had been excavating were on land the Squamish had always held sacred, but left untouched. These remote places were reserved for what traditions called the wild people, the Smali.
I went into certain areas of our territory. The elders would ask me, so, well, why are you going there? That's where the wild people live.
But Reimer realized even the elders did not know all of the tribe's secrets. For millennia, Squamish shamans, the tribe's priests, had undergone a form of initiation known only among themselves. They would disappear into the wild, remote places to learn the secrets of nature. Could there be a connection between the shamans and the Smali? Finding stone tools at the same remote sites seemed to prove it.
While they were out there, it would be very common for those individuals to use stone implements. And as a result, we find remnants in very remote locations where people would have gone to do those spiritual training, those physical training activities.
But how could shamans be mistaken for Sasquatch? The young men who undertook shamanic training were expected to live in complete isolation from the rest of the world. They were forbidden from coming into contact with people. Cut off, even from their own tribe, their training could take years. In the process, gradually transforming them into unrecognizable wild men.
After a few years, they would have appeared very differently than someone living back at their home village, interacting with plants, animals, being on their own for extended periods of time. You know, they would have become very physically fit. Their hair would have become very long and unkept, but they also be behaving differently. They may be mistaken for what we call an ape or a strange creature dwelling out in the wilderness.
Some traditions even speak of these wild young men covering their bodies in thick horsehair moss to keep warm.
if someone was wearing a coat of black lichen, of course, they'd look like a hairy man.
Yeah.
But at the same time, are they doing that because they want to look like a Sasquatch as part of their ritual?
It's easy to see how the legend of hairy wild men was born.
My perspective offers a cultural explanation for what we call Sasquatch, or what we in the Squamish Nation call Smiley, the wild people.
Explaining Sasquatch as a case of mistaken identity would only be possible if shamanic training was still happening in the forests of British Columbia today. Incredibly, this seems to be the case.
Carries on into modern day, and those people who are re-engaging with the landscape in those various forms of training, they bring back important messages of the landscape.
And it's not just the Squamish people. Tribes all over the Pacific Northwest have similar age-old traditions of wild man training. Can more than 400 local eyewitnesses over more than 100 years actually have been staring into the eyes of Squamish shamans? And could similar shamanic initiations explain sightings elsewhere?
And the question might arise, can these account for all of the Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings that we have in North America?
Could this really be an answer to the question of Bigfoot?
There would have to be a whole lot of tribes participating in this back to nature wild man concept in order for that to be a reality. I don't see how the essence of what Bigfoot is to so many cultures across North America could possibly be represented with such a simple explanation.
It's time for the team to weigh the evidence and reveal their findings. The team investigating the worldwide mystery of Bigfoot is coming to its conclusions. They've narrowed down their inquiry to 3 potential suspects for what the creature, if it exists, could be. Now they consider this 3rd and latest suspect, Native American shamans training in the wild.
Can these account for all of the Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings that we have in North America?
It wouldn't account for the 16-inch footprints, though, would it?
Ian Redmond has spotted a major flaw in the shaman theory. The creature is named Bigfoot for good reason. No ordinary human could ever leave footprints like these. Studying the giant-sized footprints allegedly left by Sasquatch is Jeff Meldrum's specialty. He's studied hundreds of them and found the distribution of sizes follows a pattern identical to a real animal species.
This is exactly the type of data we would expect if we were, in fact, sampling a real population.
But the existence of hoaxers makes any definitive conclusion drawn from footprints alone uncertain. What we really need is a live specimen, or the next best thing, its bones.
As soon as you have a skull, everyone is happy. You've got all the information you need, particularly things like teeth, because, you know, they're so different between different mammal species. If you had, there'd be no argument. It would be kind of a done deal.
There is no fossil evidence either, but some of the experts are not surprised.
We know virtually nothing about gorilla fossil history because they live in forests. And in forests, fossils don't form very well. There's this scrabble for nutrients. An animal dies, it decomposes, and all the nutrients go back into the trees or other animals, and you don't get fossils.
But if Sasquatch is a giant ape, there is other evidence the scientists might expect to find.
If they're eating all this vegetable matter, they're producing a lot of dung. Perhaps they bury it. Perhaps their tradition is to scoop a hole, defecate in it, and cover it. And that's why we never find dung around the forest where they live.
All the scientists have are tantalizing clues. Hair samples that don't register as any known species. Recorded calls in the night. And most crucial of all, thousands of eyewitness reports from all over the world. Using their global map, The team has advanced the search for Bigfoot in unexpected new directions. By analyzing clusters of sightings, they have revealed fascinating new insights into its likely habitat, behavior, and ancestry. Most important of all, they have shown how the Roger Patterson film of 1967 set off an unprecedented wave of sightings that continues to this day. But by closely examining the changing patterns of data before and after Patterson's film, the team has turned the clock back and filtered out many of the distortions the footage has caused. This helped them rule out either hoaxes or cases of mistaken identity, like Florida's skunk ape, which the team believes is probably one or more escaped chimps or other species of ape. On the other side of the world, in the forest of Sumatra, the team found the opposite, a history of sightings that cannot be explained by mistaken identity. What the 3-foot-high orang pendek is, no one yet knows, but most of the team thinks it's a genuine case of an unknown creature.
I think of all of them, that's got a very strong possibility to be discovered.
Elsewhere in Asia, by analyzing sightings of Yeti, Yeren, and the Mande Barum, the team found they were all reported within a few hundred miles of each other. The discovery of fossils of a giant ape called Gigantopithecus, found in the same part of Asia, pointed to what might be their common ancestor. But they also examined striking fossil evidence of another potential Bigfoot suspect, the Neanderthal-like Almasty. If such creatures exist, they must have crossed into North America from Asia along the now vanished land bridge called Beringia. The final question our experts must confront is, did they? Bill Sellers thinks not.
This is an absolute case there that we've not got the cut and dried evidence. We've got no skull, we've got no bones, and eventually we have to admit that we should have that.
But Jeff Meldrum is optimistic. Like the recently discovered X-woman, just one bone could change science's view of Bigfoot overnight.
A single tooth could make all the difference. Suddenly, I think there would be much more interest in the Sasquatch question from the mainstream scientific community.
Jack Rink remains open-minded about the existence
of natural disasters, climate change, overcrowding. Big problems demand even bigger solutions. It's a new era for engineering. We can build our way out of anything. In Chicago, there's no room to grow, but an underground city could house thousands. This is mega engineering.
Welcome. Please enter your floor. Minus 78. Going down. This is a Chicago Underground City Express elevator with direct connections to all residences, shops, and offices below level 50.
Chicago, Illinois, the nation's third most populous city, an iconic skyline, and an urban grid teeming with the daily rhythms of city life. But Chicago is a victim of its own success. 2.8 million people call it home, which means this great metropolis is under a daily assault. Almost 7 million commuters move in and out of the city every weekday. Even the suburbs, once an antidote to the chaos of city life, are clogged with traffic.
Despite the improvements in the interstate highway system, the traffic is still growing. In fact, there is, as in all major cities, there's an hour delay at rush hour.
When it comes to traffic, the second city is second only to New York, costing Chicagoland residents nearly 1 week per year of lost time, and the local economy over $4 billion annually. When suburbanites finally make it downtown, they find the L, one of the nation's oldest, busiest transit systems, bursting at the seams. Unable to expand to accommodate a growing ridership and an ever-widening definition of rush hour.
Well, the subway and L stations are only built for 8 cars, so therefore to increase the capacity in the system, it would be necessary to increase the size of the stations, and that would come at a very great expense.
Undeveloped land around the city is scarce, so growing out is no longer an option. And with downtown real estate at a premium, the city needs a drastic, some say groundbreaking, solution. Chicago, already home to some of the nation's tallest buildings, will have to build down. Imagine an underground city directly below the Loop, over 1,300 feet deep, containing nearly 100 floors of apartments, offices, parks, and more. Room enough for tens of thousands of people to live, work, and play. It's the best solution to the Windy City space crunch.
Quite clearly you can get more people doing something or living or whatever you want to do in this underground space, where now you have very limited space on top.
It's an undertaking so big, so innovative, that it will usher in a public works project of unparalleled dimensions, challenges, and dangers. It will require excavating over 230 million cubic yards of rock, construction crews laboring tirelessly below millions of Chicagoans, to build living spaces with new methods of ventilation and lighting, to ensure that the city beneath Chicago succeeds. It won't be easy, but it may be necessary. Expanding underground is a solution that's becoming more plausible, with the emergence of new techniques to make living underground a reality.
All this is technologically doable. It comes then very quickly down to what is the other side of engineering, is what does this cost and how long does it take to build?
Chicago is an ideal place for this bold experiment. From the ashes of the Great Fire of 1871, the city grew to become the epicenter of an architectural revolution, spawning the first skyscraper in 1885 and hosting the most influential World's Fair in history in 1893. By building underground, Chicago will cement its reputation as one of the most forward-thinking cities on the planet. But it may not be the first. Amsterdam is already proposing to make space below ground where none exists above. In this Dutch city, where streetcars, pedestrians, and 550,000 bicycles compete for space along narrow streets, the volume of cars is a growing problem.
Because Amsterdam is a nice historical town and there is a lot of traffic in the town, you cannot enjoy the town because There's everywhere there's traffic on the channels, there's traffic on the quays, everywhere there's traffic.
Ancient city planners never foresaw a day when their picturesque byways would be overrun with automobiles. Today, there's a movement to get them off the streets. But to do that, while still maintaining Amsterdam's historic charm, it has to look towards a signature feature of its historic past: the city's canals. Amsterdam is already proposing to make space below ground where none exists above. The plan? A network of underground complexes built beneath the city's 65 miles of iconic waterways.
So we thought we bring a lot of functions who doesn't need daylight under the ground.
Parking garages, movie theaters, and shops, all built beneath miles of real estate that just happens to be filled with water.
Working in the canal space is indeed the best options, because you make from 1 square meter which has no value, you make 6 square meters which has a lot of value, of course.
In fact, the plan will convert over 20 square miles of largely untapped space and provide storage for thousands of cars. But building in Amsterdam requires sensitivity to the city's unique architecture. Amsterdam's streets can't be choked with construction equipment. Some are so narrow that the massive trucks needed to build underground won't even fit.
We don't want to have any trucks in the town, because that gives an awful lot of mess, and we don't want to mess up this nice historical town.
Even if crews could access the area from sidewalks, they'd be dangerously close to the city's narrow canal houses, precariously perched above the waterways.
Let's say in Chicago, you have to drill a hole and you can place a house. It's a complete other way of building. In Amsterdam, it's not so easy to build a house because of the soil is what some call soft water.
Amsterdam's soft water, or swampy soil, makes constructing large, heavy structures nearly impossible, which is why buildings are rarely higher than 3 or 4 stories. Most of the canal houses are supported by little more than wooden piles extending into that soft water. Heavy vibration generated by construction could spell disaster. Only the canals are far enough away from buildings and wide enough to fit construction equipment. But the canals are filled with water, so engineers have proposed a solution as unique as the city itself. Amsterdam's canal system has 16 working locks, which can be closed at any time. With the locks closed, the canals can be drained.
I can imagine that people think that the most difficult thing is to bring out the water out of the canals. But in fact, that is technical one of the easiest things.
Once the canals are dry, crews will get to work, digging 30 feet down before sealing off a new surface that's both sealing to the complex below and floor to the canal above. It's a solution that will not only minimize the risk to the thousands of buildings that abut the canals, but will also keep the city from having to shut down.
Because we are working in the canal space, there is less inconvenience for the people.
Later, restoring the canals is as simple as opening the locks.
After we have finished it, the canal is exactly the same as it is now. Only there are no cars on the ground anymore, so you can enjoy the city and the nice historical houses.
The project would remove thousands of cars from sidewalks, and if it works, it could spur other cities to take up the challenge. There's just one problem. Few cities have canals from which to access their downtowns. In Chicago, there's simply no way to dig up streets without paralyzing the city and infuriating millions.
People are afraid of change. That's difficult. It's not a technical difficult, but it's very difficult to explain them. You get a better city.
Chicago may be the perfect location for this subterranean experiment, because deep beneath the glass, steel, and asphalt of this historic city lies an even richer geological past.
Well, I think it's easiest to think of Chicago geology as being a layer cake of widely differing geologic materials.
The first layer is approximately 100 feet of glacial clay, loose, soft material that's barely suitable for large structures. But beneath that lies 400 feet of limestone, strong rock that's perfect for hollowing out large chambers.
The limestone beneath Chicago is advantageous because it is stronger than concrete, typical concrete that we pour for structures.
That layer is followed by over 100 feet of shale, an unstable rock that's less ideal for building.
Shale is 5 to 10 times weaker than limestone. It is subject to this phenomenon we call slaking. When exposed to water, it expands and fractures and degrades.
Vertical access shafts could be drilled through the shale to the next layer of limestone, which extends for another 400 feet. It's a pattern that repeats again down to 1,300 feet before hitting a deep layer of sandstone.
The top of that sandstone is weak, very weak, so weak in fact that it can be mined with a fire hose.
That weakness means that the underground city could go no deeper. But it's the alternating sections of limestone that make Chicago an ideal location for this feat of geological engineering. And excavating limestone is something with which Chicago is already familiar. Here at the Vulcan Mine in Naperville, Illinois, 45 minutes from downtown Chicago, an active limestone and dolomite mine has been in operation for more than 2 years, with enough material left for decades more. Today, crews will descend 400 feet to excavate the latest level of the mine. Their goal is to remove thousands of tons of rock in one day. They do it through a process called drill and blast. The drilling is taken care of by the Fletcher J352 LS. A 385 horsepower rig bores 16-foot holes into the rock, 59 holes per round, which are filled with explosives, courtesy of the ANFO loader. 2 tanks on this truck hold 5,000 pounds of ANFO, ammonia nitrate coated with fuel oil. This explosive material is injected into the holes via an air hose and set to detonate in sequence. It's a slow, methodical process.
Drilling and blasting must be conducted in a strict sequence that involves drilling, loading, evacuation, blasting, ventilation. Difficulty of transporting personnel during evacuation limits the completion to a minimum of 4 to 8 hours per round.
Safety is the utmost concern, but the process gets results. The 1,100 pounds of ANFO used in this round dislodges 1,400 tons of material and take a 14-foot layer from the wall. Drilling and blasting creates an open space where once there was a solid mass of rock. It also creates a structural engineering challenge which must be addressed immediately.
Excavating large openings causes stress concentrations that can overload the rock without reinforcement, and the larger the opening and the deeper the opening, the larger the stress concentrations.
To shore things up, another driller is on the job, boring vertical holes which are then filled with epoxy and steel bars to reinforce the ceiling. After the blast, excavated material is removed via this conveyor belt and trucked to area construction sites to be used as aggregate. a crucial ingredient in concrete that can be put to immediate use in Chicago.
If it's good material, which if you do this in the limestone in Chicago, that will be probably the case, you actually can use this material to fabricate concrete, some of which will go back into this underground city.
Well, why transport it to the surface when you can keep it down there and manufacture the city on the spot?
The underground city could use some of the material, but not all of it, leaving enough extra excavated material to pave over 30,000 miles of roads, which could stretch around the globe 1.5 times. With the ease of excavation, digging a new city is not a problem. Holding up the existing city is.
It's important to think about the depth below the foundations of the structures at which this underground city can be built.
The issue is that under these high-rise buildings, you have the large diameter piles, and under these large diameter piles, you have high loads.
Chicago's tallest building, the Sears Tower, soars to 108 stories, 1,450 feet into the air. Holding it up, 200 piles extending nearly 100 feet into the ground, sending the building's load into the surrounding rock. And that's just one building. Beneath Chicago lies a virtual forest of foundations and piles. Dig too close to them, and the buildings they support could be in trouble.
If you were to dig a hole right under the end of the pile, the lower end of the pile, quite clearly that would collapse.
For safety's sake, the first level of the underground city must be positioned hundreds of feet beneath the lowest pile. But getting there without closing city streets, rerouting miles of train lines, or redirecting sewage tunnels, water pipes, and utilities would be an enormous challenge. Avoiding them altogether would be the easiest, cheapest option.
To access the underground city, it would be important to construct that in an area where there weren't structures and utilities already.
Unable to disturb the city life above, crews will have to begin their access to the worksite from miles away.
Another possibility would be to provide this access with an incline instead of coming in vertically.
Starting from outside the city center, crews and equipment will tunnel downtown, a journey that would stop nearly 300 feet below the center of Chicago. Deep enough to avoid building foundations and city infrastructure. There, they will begin a drilling and blasting routine to construct the first level, a staging area for building even deeper. But as they do, they'll have to make sure that the walls of this new subterranean metropolis are strong enough to hold back the water of mighty Lake Michigan. Chicago is famous for two things. It's big and it's cold. But one place that's bigger and colder is Moscow. With 15 million people in the metropolitan area and over 3 million cars causing some of the worst traffic in the world, Moscow's explosive growth is putting it on a crash course with catastrophe.
The real #1 priority right now is to get rid of the transportation collapse in the city and the constant traffic jams.
To cope, the Russian capital has nowhere to go but down.
Moscow has a historic center. If we want to build anything and not ruin any historic architecture, we have to build underground.
Russia is in the middle of an underground construction boom with 2 new projects that aim to save the city from its own success. The first, Tverskaya Mall, will be the biggest underground mall in all of Europe when it's finished. 4 stories deep, spanning over 350,000 square feet. Russia is in the middle of an underground construction boom. The first, Tverskaya Mall, will be the biggest underground mall in all of Europe when it's finished. But building it means redirecting nearly 294,000 cars that creep through adjacent streets each day. And crews must work perilously close to traffic. The second site, Pawelецki Square, will one day be a 5-story deep shopping and parking complex, integrated with the train station that sits above it. But before that plan is realized, crews must cope with the city's soft, muddy soil. The soft soil doesn't pose a problem when erecting the shorter buildings that are the city's signature, but it's not ideally suited for building underground. Just to get to a firm enough stratum for building means digging down over 90 feet to stiffer, stronger clay. Back at Pawelецki Square, the crew knows those challenges all too well. Digging one giant hole for an underground mall isn't an option. Not when Moscow's loose, muddy soil is so hard to hold back. So today, instead of digging space for the complex and then lining it with concrete walls, they're doing the opposite, building the walls first. That's the job of this excavator. 6 sets of blades dig through the slop, cutting a 2-foot-wide chamber that is almost immediately filled with concrete, forming walls to a complex that is yet to be hollowed out. It's slow and laborious, requiring frequent starts and stops just to clean it. But once the walls are set, crews can continue digging. But the challenge doesn't end after the walls are in place. Digging in a city means rerouting utilities, sewage lines, and other infrastructure. Eventually, crews will be able to hollow out this section of Pawelецki Mall. Like on the other side of the worksite, where crews are now 100 feet deep. Lining the walls with steel rebar, concrete, and plastic. With so much water dripping through, the risk of cave-ins is still all too real. That's why these giant poles, 5 feet in diameter, some 200 feet in length, are put in to hold back the walls. Despite their massive size, they're temporary, removed once the entire box is reinforced. Because water always finds the weakest path, engineers must be vigilant, even though Pawelецki Square is half a mile from the Moscow River. Imagine the dangers crews would face halfway around the world, back in Chicago. A city perched on the shores of a great lake.
One could imagine Lake Michigan being right there. How does one control all that water from getting into an underground structure?
Allowing water to seep in could lead to disaster. Each level of Chicago's underground city would have to be painstakingly reinforced in order to stay ahead of a population boom that threatens to strangle the city. The underground city would have to be built quickly. One day, Chicago's underground city will look less like this and more like this. Ochotny Riyadh, Moscow's biggest underground mall. With 3 stories of shopping and dining, it's a place where thousands of Muscovites can escape the cold. It's just like Chicago's underground city of the future. The mall is hidden in plain sight, mere steps from the center of the city. For Chicago's underground city to even begin to approach the comfort of Moscow's underground mall, it will have to address a huge issue. In any mine, air quality is a priority. During construction, engineers can employ a ventilation method in use at the nearby Vulcan mine. This vertical shaft works to pull air in from the mine's access tunnels and directly up, making sure that dust and other contaminants don't linger for too long. This is a system meant to provide comfort and security to dozens of miners working 10-hour shifts. Replace them with thousands of residents living underground 24 hours a day, and the ventilation needs become far more complex.
People will have to occupy these spaces for 50 to 100 years, whereas miners occupy the spaces for single digits of years as opposed to multiple decades.
Deep beneath the ground, there will be no open windows, no breezes to keep fresh air circulating. Ventilation is a problem that's already been solved, far beyond the needs of any underground city in Boston, Massachusetts. Here, engineers behind the Big Dig, the most expensive public works project in U.S. history, were faced with thousands of cars passing through almost 4 miles of tunnels every day, spewing tons of poisonous exhaust. Moving vehicles push air through the tunnels, but traffic jams can cause air to linger and dangerous gases to build up. So the Massachusetts Turnpike Authority installed a complex ventilation system to keep the air moving. Near tunnel openings, jet fans circulate air. But with some tunnels as deep as 120 feet, Boston had to go to more extreme measures to bring air underground. Deep beneath this building in the heart of Boston lie the lungs of the Central Artery Tunnel System. A building 125 feet tall pulls in fresh air and transfers it to the tunnels below.
The intake air is sucked in through those louvers, as you see behind me, and it's sucked down to a fan chamber and through a series of tunnels or conduit into the tunnel.
100 feet below ground, in a massive intake room, giant fans pull fresh air down the shaft. 400 horsepower engines are capable of moving 333,000 cubic feet per minute and generating wind speeds of up to 62 miles per hour. It's a powerful system based on age-old techniques.
All the components of the Big Dig basically used tried and true technology. The hardware and the mechanical equipment performing the ventilation is pretty much a century old now.
It takes 13 buildings like this to cover Boston's tunnels. And while the means of moving air hasn't changed in years, the ability to adjust to the changing needs of an underground environment has.
Basically, we have a surveillance in the tunnels. We have cameras watching the traffic. Almost all of our cameras and sensors are monitored from our operations control center.
Inside the Massachusetts Turnpike Authority building, at the Operations Control Center, specialists monitor 32 vent zones and control 235 fans and over 500 cameras. With just the push of a button, they're concerned with air quality and a lot more.
More than just the ventilation is monitored there, the pumping of water, the traffic conditions in general, so you really get a very efficient management of all the life safety functions within all the tunnels under one roof.
But this centralized command center has some fail-safe backups. Even if communication with one of the vent buildings is lost, each vent tower is staffed and powered independently.
There are local controls within the vent buildings that we can still operate the fans by in a manual mode with personnel.
Chicago's underground city will apply much of the technology used in Boston, only at 10 times the depth. The underground city's walls and floors will be lined with ventilation chambers. Fans at the bottom of the city will pull fresh air in through intake shafts located at the top, where it will descend down 1,300 feet and circulate throughout the city before returning to the surface to be exhausted. Regulating the airflow would require the kind of sharp monitoring used in Boston.
You're living down there, so it's not just a transient air, and I'm sure you would probably have a much stricter requirement for the cleanliness of the air that you're breathing.
Regulating air quality for a 24-hour residential population, and not just automobile traffic, would require many more fans and a control system that would be the eyes and ears of an underground city. It's something that would provide security and peace of mind for the residents beneath Chicago should the unthinkable happen. With the underground city a reality, one factor of Chicago's legendary climate will be mitigated, if not eliminated altogether.
Well, there are advantages to living underground. For instance, you're not subjected to the vagaries of Chicago winters.
Deep beneath the city's streets, residents wouldn't have to worry about snow or even staying warm. Because if there's one thing about living underground that's predictable, it's the temperature.
Well, no matter how hot or cold it is in the air in Chicago, 20 feet underground, it's around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, no matter the time of the year.
But the deeper you get, the warmer it becomes, thanks to something called the geothermal gradient. On the surface, temperatures are affected by the sun and atmospheric changes. But up to 200 feet below ground, the temperature remains constant. Then, for every 100 feet deeper, the temperature rises about 1 degree Fahrenheit. Fortunately, in the underground city, the geological limits of construction would ensure that things didn't get too toasty.
I think it might be nice to be constantly at 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit than it would be the highly variable 0 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface.
An unvarying climate is one advantage that the underground city will have over its surface level counterpart. But there's one quality to which the underground city can't hold a candle.
Possibly the most important issue would be the lighting itself, because without artificial illumination down there, it's completely black.
Daylight, so vital to health and human happiness, can only come from one source. Even in Moscow, with just 70 sunny days per year, the underground mall Ochotny Riyadh does what it can. With skylights that decorate the roof of the mall, allowing sunlight to travel 3 stories underground. It's a solution that'll work in Chicago too, up to a point. Massive skylights will illuminate the structure's uppermost levels, but deeper down there would be no way for sunlight to reach people. This simple fact would make opting for a life above ground, in spite of Chicago's cold, worth it to many. But if a solution exists, it may be found at Rensselaer's Polytechnic Institute's Lighting Research Center in Troy, New York. Here, researchers focus on light's effects on health and the circadian system, the 24-hour cycle that all humans are programmed to follow.
The circadian system wants to see a regular 24-hour pattern, and that is the pattern that we evolutionarily grew up with. It's in the last 100 years that we have electric light that allows us to extend light into the nighttime. But what's also happened in the last 100 years, we live indoors.
With that move indoors to offices and homes with electric lighting, humans have disrupted the light-dark pattern that regulates the circadian system.
We can be in perfectly good light to see, and yet we can be in biological darkness. You can't necessarily stimulate the circadian system with electric lighting.
With only artificial light, the internal clocks of underground citizens would go haywire.
The circadian system is a clock that runs all the time anyway. And if you don't have a resetting of that clock, a synchronization of the sunrise, sunset, you can go into this architectural jet lag, as we call it.
To maintain this synchronization, engineers will have to design lighting systems that mimic the patterns on the surface. But even these artificial means don't go far enough. Massive skylights will illuminate the structure's uppermost levels, but deeper down there would be no way for sunlight to reach people. This simple fact would make opting for a life above ground, in spite of Chicago's cold, worth it to many. Engineers will have to design lighting systems that mimic the patterns on the surface. But even these artificial means don't go far enough.
It is important not just how much light you get, but when you're getting the light and what kind of light you're getting.
In the Light Research Center's lab, a test measures light's effects on brain activity. Hooked up to an EEG, a subject is exposed to different wavelengths of light. While all wavelengths stimulate the brain, blue light is the most effective.
The reason why we're working with blue light is because we have shown that the circadian system is maximally sensitive to blue light.
That may be because the color of the sky has programmed our brains to respond to the blue wavelength of visible light. RPI has found that the need for blue light is so ingrained into human DNA that it only takes a small amount to trigger alertness.
So this way you can effectively achieve the same result in reducing melatonin levels or increasing brain activities with less amount of power or with less light. So it's an energy efficient way of impacting the circadian system.
That energy savings would preclude the city from having to bathe common areas in blue light or from running ultra-hot lights to simulate sunlight. Instead, residents could take a more personal approach.
Blue light is so effective for the circadian system. We can get very low levels of blue light and be able to impact the circadian system.
Brief exposure to blue light is as effective as using a more common method for waking up.
What you can do is, just like a cup of coffee, you can use light for 15 minutes, 20 minutes to perk you up and to give you some alerting stimulus.
There would be lots of opportunities to manipulate that light in such a way that it can provide a sense of daytime and nighttime, can provide a sense of change, and can provide a sense of difference that makes life enjoyable. It's the differences in life that I think we find attractive.
It's not only life below Chicago that would begin to improve. At street level, the city will find smaller crowds, less traffic, and a transportation system more able to cope when people are no longer commuting from outside of the city, but from underneath it.
Well, the city could be beautified if much of it were placed underground. Placing the major functions underground will allow us to think more expansively of the most appropriate uses of the surface land.
That's just what happened in Boston after the Big Dig.
The city has been knitted together again, if you will. Some of the surface land has been reclaimed for public use versus having an elevated highway on it. There are now parks where there were steel structures before.
Those above-ground improvements could go a long way towards generating support to expand the underground city. But continuing to hollow out the ground beneath Chicago's skyscrapers could be met with opposition. So the underground city will have to navigate uncharted territory.
Well, the state of Illinois owns the lake bottom from the shore outward, and there are no buildings there. Perhaps it might be a great deal less expensive and more quickly realized to actually excavate the underground city indexed over by the lakeshore.
By connecting a new network of underground chambers to the existing underground city, urban planners could create a mirror image of the city beneath the lake.
In terms of changing the way in which the world thinks of Chicago, it might move it out of the realm of its current beautiful vertical skyline to thinking about maybe its underground skyline.
There's just one problem. The first part of the underground city was built without anyone living there. The challenges that once only affected crews could now have an impact on thousands of permanent underground residents.
You'll never be able to see the complete picture underground, as you will, above ground. So the unknowns are basically higher, and you have to deal with that during construction.
Most important issue to address would be the possibility of any types of historic gas deposits that are located there.
If crews accidentally stumbled upon a hidden gas line, the consequences could be disastrous. Evacuation plans would share much in common with those in place for skyscrapers.
One can only think about the situation for tall buildings now. How many elevators would be necessary, how many stairwell cores would be necessary. Those same discussions would have to be held for the underground facility as well.
But thousands of feet below ground, those considerations would be flipped upside down. With elevators inoperable, stairs would be the only means of egress. Those at the bottom levels would have to climb the equivalent of a 100-story building to escape. Not an option for the very young, elderly, or handicapped. Emergencies would require fast thinking and fast acting on the part of city officials, who would seal off trouble spots, protecting the rest of the city by flushing out dangerous gases. The technological challenges of building underground can be overcome.
It will cost more or will cost less. But from a technical point of view, there's not much left today that we cannot do.
The psychological challenges are another story.
The question is, how much time would people spend on the ground? Where's the limit where people would say, no, I don't want to do that?
But with cities bursting at the seams, struggling to keep up with a population boom, those concerns may be overridden by practical necessity. It will take some time for Chicagoans to accept the necessity of living underground.